advise me when we're broadcasting.
And you're live, Your Worship.
All right, thank you very much, Kayla. Welcome everybody to our Monday, October the 5th council meeting for October 5, 2020. Council met in a closed session at 5 o'clock, and so it's just after 5:30. I guess we're just a few minutes late, but we're getting started here on item number 2 on our agenda. I'll just start off by saying that I'm sorry about these lines going across my picture. The sun is beaming in through the window, and I'm not going to complain about the sun at this time of the year. So let's hope we get to see a bit more of it yet this year. So everyone is present who's going to be here tonight, so that's great. All right, Council, item number 2 is the approval of the agenda. Recommendation be it resolved that Council of the Township of Clearview hereby approve the agenda dated October the 5th, 2020, as presented. Okay, tell you what, are you moving or seconding? I see, because I like to have a mover, a seconder, and then a request to speak.
Okay, go ahead.
A mover and seconder, Mr. Lamers and the Deputy Mayor. Okay, Mr. Councillor Lamers, Deputy Mayor. Councillor McKechnie, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship. Sorry about that.
No problem.
So, Your Worship, the Director of Planning has provided 2 interim control bylaws for our consideration. I would request that the interim control bylaw option 1 and interim control bylaw option 2, in other words, both options, be added to the agenda this evening. I would also request that it be discussed and voted on immediately after the interim control bylaw motion, which I believe is currently item 13. And I would also request that item 13, the interim control bylaw motion, be moved forward on the agenda to immediately following item 5, which is deputations and presentations. So.
Okay, Councillor McKechnie, that's pretty clear and straightforward. That's something that this council's done before. So we're going to move the notice of motion forward to following our deputations, and then following that, we're going to add onto the agenda the option 1 and option 2 of the bylaws as been presented. These are considered on-desk items, but they're available. Any questions about that ask of the councillor? No members of council with any change? Okay, anything further on the agenda then to make any adjustments? Okay, so I have a mover and seconder. That'll be an amended agenda because we're adding those 2 items and we're just moving the order around. I'll call the motion. All those in favor? And that motion carries. Thank you very much. All right, item number 3 is disclosure of pecuniary interest and general nature thereof. Is there any members at this time who have a disclosure regarding business of the council tonight? Nope, seeing none. If anything comes up during the meeting, please bring it forward and we will deal with it at that time. All right, now item number 4 is our public participation period. I just want to grab my iPad because I always write the information down onto my iPad here. So I'm going to just open it up and have it ready to provide some information for people. All right, so again, public participation in the teleconference setting, the Zoom setting, is by submitting their participation comments through an online form, and I'd recommend to the public to always use that form. That's the best form you can do. It's available on our website at clearview.ca. So we have 5 items for tonight. I'll start with Mr. Magwood, item number 4.1. Chuck sent in quite a petition, which is in support of the the interim control bylaw recommendation that Councillor McKechnie was just speaking about. Thank you very much, Mr. Magwood, for that and for those persons that joined his petition. Item number 4.2, and Becky McLaughlin, also want to thank you for your letter and your recommendation regarding the interim control bylaw that will be discussed a little bit later. Item number 4.3 is Mr. Giffen. I want to thank you, Mr. Giffen, regarding the interim control bylaw. I want to thank you for your clarifications and facts from the property owner. And we are all neighbors in Clearview Township, and I would hope that neighbors can speak to neighbors. And rumors are not used to make decisions at this council. So I appreciate the letter, Mr. Giffen, and appreciate the clarity and clarification of that note. Item 4.4, Mr. Margis, Ms. Margis. Thank you very much for your letter. It's in regards to also the interim control bylaw. It'll be discussed a little bit later on the meeting, as we mentioned. Council will make decisions in a democratic manner, and at the will of council, decisions will be made. That is certainly what we do at this council table. So thank you, Ms. Marges, for your comment. Item 4.5 is an item from Sylvia Held and Kevin Main. First of all, I want to thank you for your letter. Now, I also want to, I have a few things I'd like to state about this letter. First is I want to extend a welcome to our community and welcome you to the community. And I look forward to meeting you both in person as neighbors. Second, the use of the word Asian, I believe, is not acceptable in the rumors or in the actual use in conversations. Frankly, it's offensive to me. I accept that your letter uses this language to bring to the attention of council and the public that this is not acceptable to you either. So we must all do better and eliminate racial remarks and discrimination in our community. And so thank you for that. Item 3, I'd like to mention that the local media are not under the control of Clearview Township. They are independent media, and that's how they exist in our township. The Creemore Echo is a local media business and will take ownership of their articles and their publications. That has nothing to do with Clearview Township. And finally, Mr. McKechnie, Councillor McKechnie, has asked to be able to respond to this public participation question. And so I'll turn it to Mr. McKechnie, if you would.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I'd like to speak to a couple of the concerns expressed in 2 of the emails. First of all, I would like to state for the public record that I have not contacted the Creemore Echo. I have not been contacted by the Creemore Echo, nor have I ever spoken to the Creemore Echo or any other media outlet on this issue or any other issue that this council is currently discussing or has dealt with, has discussed in the past. Further, my motion this evening for an interim control bylaw is not site specific. Rather, it applies to the whole township. It applies township wide. So it's not site specific at all. So I just wanted to get that on as a public record that I have not contacted the media. They've not talked to me. And this bylaw applies township wide. It is not site specific. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Councillor McKechnie. All right, and so I remind the public that public participation is again open to you to send in your comments, and we receive them up until noon on Monday of the council meeting date, or any other council meeting date if we happen to move our council meetings. So noon on the day of the council meeting. All right, thank you very much for that. Item number 5 is our opportunity for deputations and presentations. We have, since going to telecommunications or teleconferencing meetings, we've not done many of these at all, in fact, council. So at this time, I will ask the clerk to join us and welcome our present presenters. We have Kevin Elwood and Chris Skelton. So Madam Clerk, would you activate their screens and let them join the meeting, please?
Yes, so I'm going to ask Kayla to bring them on. When I gave her host permission, she's the only one that can bring them on.
They are already there. You'll see their names. Chris and Kevin should be at the bottom there.
I see Chris and Kevin at the bottom. Very good. Thank you, Kayla. Are you joining us visually, Chris or Kevin? I'm unsure.
I can see you, but I can't see myself.
Okay, I'm not hearing you guys at all. Let's see if we can get this working. Chris, do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, there you go. Okay, thank you, Chris. Nice to have you join us.
Thank you.
Kevin, where are you?
I am board there now. I should be unmuted.
Yeah, I think you're unmuted, Kevin. I'm not seeing you. Do you have video to join us with, join the meeting with, Mr. Elwood?
No.
All right. Yeah, we haven't done, there we go. Kevin, you've just shown up on my screen. There you are. Okay, Mr. Skelton and Mr. Elwood, nice to see you, gentlemen. So we're going to give you an opportunity to do a presentation as part of this discussion. So I'm not sure who's going first. I'm going to mute my microphone and allow you guys to carry on. I'll hand it over to you, Mr. Skelton, first.
Well, thank you, Mr. Measures and council members, for this opportunity to speak to you today. I'm Chris Skelton, and with me is Kevin Elwood. We're both Clearview Township residents, and we're speaking to you on behalf of approximately 115 families who support the interim control bylaw that Councillor McCackney has tabled with respect to cannabis production and processing facilities. I live with my family on the southwest corner of the 6th concession and the 2122 side road. Our area of the township is characterized by rolling hills of farmland and forest, and is occupied by resident farm families and by non-farming families who reside on a full-time or part-time basis. I think it is fair to say that most of us have a deep attachment and tie to the land and the environment that comes from working on it and living on it and playing on it, recreating there. I also think that this appreciation of Clearview's rural lifestyle is something that's shared by most, if not all, residents of the township. With the legalization of cannabis, residents of rural areas across the province and the continent have seen a dramatic growth in cannabis production and processing facilities. This growing industry has created a lot of good jobs and a lot of beneficial economic spin-offs. But unfortunately, with the growth also comes conflict with residents due to impacts from odor and noise and light and traffic, as well as the visual impact of an apparent industrialized growth or industry in a rural place. Out of concerns for these conflicts, municipalities have been rushing to develop regulations to manage them. In Clearview, commercial cannabis growing and processing is a permitted activity under agricultural zoning. Agricultural zoning covers a majority of the township. Anyone who owns property with this zoning and who has a license from Health Canada may set up a growing operation or a processing operation or both. This all makes Clearview the perfect landing pad for any cannabis entrepreneur, licensed or otherwise, to set up shop. As you will learn shortly, Clearview is exceptional amongst Ontario municipalities in that we have 2 large licensed cannabis operations, and we don't even mention cannabis in our municipal terms of reference, in our official plan, or in our zoning bylaws. Our current wide open status is worrisome for residents. As residents who live on or near properties with agricultural zoning, we had hoped that regulations imposed by other levels of government would provide protections against land use impacts resulting from cannabis production and processing. Unfortunately, there are few, if any. For example, one would think that minimum distance separation calculations designed to avoid conflicts between neighbors resulting from agricultural odors would bear on any proposed licensed grow-up. This is standard operating procedure for planning departments and the NEC whenever residences are proposed near odor-producing agricultural operations and vice versa. Unfortunately, despite the powerful skunk-like odor of cannabis, the regulations only consider livestock to be a generator of odor. One would also think that because cannabis operations produce a great deal of nutrient-rich solid and liquid waste, that they would have to comply with the Nutrient Management Act and would have to develop and follow a nutrient management plan, but they don't. Unfortunately, the Act only considers, or the Act only applies to livestock waste. With all this in mind, it appears that our municipality is the only level of government that is well positioned to protect the interests of residents while allowing for the growth of the cannabis industry. Thus, on behalf of the residents of Clearview, not only those of us living on or adjacent to agricultural lands, but all across the township, I ask you to carefully consider the compelling information our group is presenting and to recognize that we need time to prepare for the growth of the cannabis industry in the township. Please support Councillor McKechnie's interim control bylaw and direct staff to develop a land use study regarding cannabis production and processing. Now I'll turn the screen over to Kevin, who will provide you some more information about this issue.
Your worship, council, and members of the public who have joined us, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to hear our comments and deputation to council this evening on the cannabis production facilities and the use of an interim control bylaw to address these facilities in the township. I did want to just go over our deputation material that was provided to council for members of the public. It is available in the agenda, and you can click on the link there and view the document. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the document because we would like to provide council with time to ask any questions after I present it. So our subject is the interim control bylaw for cannabis production facilities. Chris sort of set the stage there about where Clearview is and some of the concerns and issues that the residents and the agricultural community has with new facilities. We speak directly to the interim control bylaw, but we also have Constantine Starakos available. He's a municipal lawyer, which would be able to provide council with answers to any questions on the, and I'm sure our planner will be able to better answer the specifics on the use of an interim control bylaw and its duration. It is time to undertake a thorough study of land use policy and regulations. I believe we are also doing this in connection with our official plan review that is ongoing with the planning department. But the regulatory process for implementing bylaws takes some time and public consultation. Right now, we have, as Chris had mentioned, we have a lot of, it's a new growth industry. It's a rapidly developing industry, the cannabis industry, and it has arrived at Clearview not only in the past, but it's also increasing its presence in Clearview, especially in our rural agricultural areas. So there are no bylaws currently to reference cannabis production in Clearview. Production facilities are allowed on an uncontrolled basis. Now, right now in Clearview on agricultural land, there, Chris had mentioned there's no provisions for storage, signage, minimum distance setbacks and separations, and any adverse negative impacts by cannabis production on nearby adjacent sensitive land uses. The problems we mentioned, just to highlight, is the changing character of the rural agricultural area with the introduction of these large production facilities in indoor structures. The odors that are emitted from the marijuana plants, increase in traffic to and from the facilities, security as part of the Health Canada licensing. There's a high level of security, which is a requirement, but it does have a presence of more like a prison facility as opposed to an agricultural production facility. So it makes for the curb appeal and the appearance in the township from a normal historical farming practice is very different, not only from the building structures, but also from the high level of security. There has been concerns, not only this certainly arrived in the past, and we saw this with some of our existing facilities where we did require a liaison committee to deal with light pollution. And cannabis, of course, it's not only are they growing under artificial light in many instances indoors, but also a lot of the security lighting is an issue for the adjacent neighbors and landowners. Waste, Chris did talk about the waste. That is a concern, and protecting our farmland. So other jurisdictions, municipal governments are taking steps to protect their agricultural lands. And this, many of these facilities are indoor facilities as opposed to growing directly in the land. They're in our soil, the existing native soils. So it alters the soil structure in a big way. There could be, and we do believe that the increased cost to the municipality, which if any, it becomes a burden on the ratepayers. We did do compile some information on action taken by other municipalities on cannabis production facilities. We are an outlier, Clearview, in not regulating. The information available was from other municipalities, and it was our best efforts via an internet research. It was not exhaustive survey of all municipalities in Ontario, but the report and the table that we provided does indicate that the vast majority have taken action to regulate. There could be many more than what we are able to obtain doing an internet search. But if you do look at the chart, you can see that many of our neighbors have taken action, neighboring municipalities have taken action. You will see that agricultural open is where Clearview presently lies. So cannabis production facilities have caused many citizen complaints in other Ontario communities. And if we reference many recent newspaper media articles, we can find that information. And so many municipalities are taking steps to address the community's concerns and try and find a way that everyone can get along and function in the community. So it's really, the big one is for many of the residents and neighbors that have shared their concerns was protecting the agriculture nature of the area. The province does provide guidelines in Ontario's prime agricultural areas to assist municipalities and decision makers in the interpretations of policies. And we believe that the role of the interim control bylaw would provide us and the council, as well as planning in the community, a consultative process where we could use these guidelines to come up with an effective bylaw that would be acceptable to all stakeholders. We did provide some possible next steps, and I think some of these steps are being taken this evening. I did want to leave council with a few additional comments outside of the deputation, and just wanted to state that a couple of years ago, the province of Ontario requested that all lower tier municipal governments either opt in or opt out a provincial program of allocation of the retail cannabis sales sites being approved throughout the province. Clearview's council of the day opted out of the retail program, but took no further action to review the growing and processing of cannabis within the township. This has Clearview in a category of agricultural open, which was shown in our table and survey for cannabis production. Many municipalities are taking action to regulate the cannabis production within their boundaries, and it is resulting in Clearview Township being an attractant for the cannabis industry. And we did have an example of that in the past with our exotic animal bylaw, where some of our neighbors took action and passed exotic animal bylaws and actually drove some of those hosts to our township, which then we had to enact a bylaw to deal with it. This is being the case right now. We are attracting producers, responsible producers and irresponsible producers. The experience of the township so far has reflected that it's do as you will, regulatory environment with good and bad experiences in the past several years. Licensed operation and non-licensed operations appearing with no knowledge to the township staff, our enforcement agencies, and to area residents. And worst out of all this is rumors of incoming operations. This current state of Clearview Township, making a name for itself as a willing host, has alerted us to the entire township and current producers' vulnerability. This current open status is resulting in conflicts between all stakeholders. Cannabis growers have no clarity as to what is acceptable within Clearview Township. What is not acceptable? It is only good planning that we have bylaws to provide this clarity. This will alleviate the need for producers to mitigate community concerns after investing in a site that has resulted in negative impacts requiring costly alterations or even possible closure. Planning development is what is needed in just this situation. When external forces insert themselves on a community's balance, an interim control bylaw will provide the time necessary to study the impact on our land use policies. Cannabis production will change before, so we are prepared. As council can appreciate from the community deputation, there are many, many questions and concerns as to the future of the Clearview agricultural community. Should Clearview remain open and allowing all cannabis producers to concentrate without any wholesome public consultation toward a regulatory guidance for all stakeholders now and into the future? I'd like to thank council for the opportunity to speak to them on this matter, and Chris and I are available for questions.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Elwood. And it's on a personal note, it's nice to have you joining our council meeting here again. Mr. Elwood, nice to see you again. Mr. Skelton has rejoined us. I know you mentioned Constantine briefly in your presentation, but is he joining us or not? I don't see his name anywhere, and so I wasn't sure if he is in fact sitting in on this or not. Is Madam Clerk?
Kayla has permitted him to join the meeting now. So
yeah, okay, that's great. Okay, first of all, then before we go to Constantine, is there any other questions they have for Mr. Skelton or Mr. Elwood, members of council? Any questions for the presentation? Okay, looks like you gentlemen have presented your arguments. I appreciate that, gentlemen. Constantine is with us, so perhaps we'll go to his presentation and then we'll wrap that up. As Constantine, are you, there you are. Hello, there you are. I see you pop up. Nice to see you again. It's been a long time.
It has been. Good evening, your worship and members of council. Thank you for having me here today.
Please go right ahead, and thank you for joining us.
I've been asked to speak by a group of Clearview residents. It's been a while since the last time I've done this. On the issue of interim control bylaws and cannabis. And in particular, they've asked me to give you some legal context for an interim control bylaw, what it is, what it's used for, how this situation fits the purpose of an interim control bylaw, and also the very limited grounds of a legal challenge. So I'm going to start with the basics, and you're probably all familiar with this, but I'll go over it. What is an interim control bylaw? Well, at a basic level, it's a bylaw that allows the township or municipality to freeze land uses, prohibit land uses for a period of up to 1 year. Provided, and this is the key, that it directs staff to conduct a land use planning study of its policies, planning policies. It can also be extended for a period of a year after that. the first year, during the first year, it cannot be appealed to the local planning appeal tribunal. During the second year, it can be. And it's a flexible tool. You can apply it to part of the municipality, you can apply it to all, you can create exemptions, you can tailor what it's focused on. It can be shorter than a year, just can't be longer. So what circumstances is it to be used in? Probably the most well-known case is the case of Equity Waste in Halton Hills. It's a Court of Appeal decision where it really spends quite a bit of time talking about interim control bylaws and what they're intended to be used for, and why they're a positive thing for municipality. So the Court of Appeal says that an interim control bylaw is an important planning instrument for a municipality. It allows a municipality breathing space to rethink its land use policies by suspending development that may conflict with any new policy. It also says it allows a municipality the ability to change its mind and to reconsider its land use policies. So the core takeaway from that is it allows a town or any municipality to create breathing space, the breathing space it needs to study an issue from a planning perspective and determine what the appropriate policies and zoning bylaw regulations are required. The only, and it also, the court also emphasized that the only precondition is the direction to conduct the study I mentioned to you. Now, why does the township need breathing space? I think you've heard some of the salient facts already from Kevin and Chris, but the first thing is the town's zoning bylaw and official plan don't specifically deal with cannabis. They predate the legalization, which occurred of recreational cannabis, which occurred in 2018. And so they never really turned their mind to this particular issue. Now we've known that since 2018, the cannabis industry has grown exponentially. It's year over year billions in growth from an industry that was sub-billion at its start. So we have a situation where we have land use policies that don't deal with the issue. We have exponential growth. And now we have a third factor that enters the mix, which is a lot of other municipalities have already acted. Back in 2014, the town of Caledon conducted a study of what was going on at the time and how municipalities had reacted or not reacted to cannabis growth. And this was in the context of medicinal cannabis. And it found that, a couple had passed regulations and there are more on the way. On total, about 6 were looking at the issue. Fast forward to 2019, Timmins did a study and it looked like about 30 had already turned their minds to the issue and were regulating or in the process of regulating. I know that Kevin and Chris have looked at the issue more recently and found a number of more municipalities have acted as well. So we're in a situation where municipalities are rapidly dealing with this issue. They are rapidly passing land use controls to direct where this type of land use is best suited and what standards should apply to it. In that context, there's a particularly high danger of being the unregulated municipality in a sea of regulation. They become an attractor, not necessarily for just the best, but also for the worst. And so if an interim control bylaw is passed, it gives this township an opportunity to study the issue without fear of its, of it growing or the change, changing land uses, making that decision for the township, and determine what the best policy framework it is for it. And it can say, well, where it should be located, what are the standards that should apply when it is permitted. Should site plan control be applied as well? Those are a number of key questions that the township can study and ask, and other municipalities have looked at as well. Finally, I want to turn to limited grounds of appeal. Back in the day, before 2017, it used to be that you could appeal any interim control bylaw to the Ontario Municipal Board right away. So that changed. You cannot appeal it in the first year. You can appeal it in the second year, but you cannot appeal it in the first year. So the only opportunity to challenge it is to go to court and basically argue that it's illegal. The grounds for doing so are pretty thin. It's usually bad faith or something like that, improper purpose. And what we've seen so far is there's no decision that I have been able to find that has successfully challenged an interim control bylaw on this issue. Now, I believe Kevin and Chris have come up with approximately 10 or 12 interim control bylaws that have been passed already. So that's a pretty significant number. It's rare that you get that number of interim control bylaws in any particular issue. And the fact that we haven't seen a successful challenge to date is pretty impressive. I think it should give this township quite a bit of comfort. Those are really my core points, and the rest is really over to your worship and council members if they have any questions of me.
Great. Thank you very much, Constantine. I appreciate you joining us once again. Please stand by in case there's any questions. I know I have one, but I will defer to members of council first to ask questions of either Mr. Elwood, Mr. Skelton, or Mr. Strefkos. Anybody with any questions? Yes, Mr. Lamers, and oh, I see Councillor Patterson. Okay, Mr. Lamers first.
Thank you, Worship. I'm just trying to figure out what's keeping this an agricultural business rather than a commercial operation. They should be classified as commercial operations.
Perhaps Mr. Strefkos, Mr. Constantine, can you handle that one?
I can, through your worship to Councillor Lamers. Well, that's a question that really needs to be answered through a planning study, but I'll tell you that some municipalities have decided it's an industrial use and view it as only appropriate in that area. Again, that's something you don't want to prejudge, but you allow your staff to do that study and figure out where it goes best.
If I can add to that too, Councillor Lamers, for your benefit, is that the use of the land is based on the zoning, right? So zoning says agriculture, but MPAC are still the people that assess the use of the land and then apply taxation or tax rates based on the actual use of the land. So it sort of balances out in the end, whether it's commercial, industrial, or agricultural. It is one of the things that does happen, because if you look at the buildings that have been built in our community to grow and process cannabis product, those are pretty substantial buildings on agricultural land. So impact has a lot to say about that too. Now, Mr. Patterson, I believe, was next. Is there anybody else? Councillor Patterson, go ahead.
Thank you. I know in the information provided, there was a recommendation to exempt the industrial uses that are currently in Clearview Agri-Farm and Peace Natural. But since it's, as the argument goes, since it's still a permitted use, first question I would ask is, are there any currently built under this provision beyond those two? Are there any currently in progress of being built? And to the information that was provided by Constantine, at what point would you freeze a project that is in application, being built, or I assume, given that it was a current use when it was completed, that those would be exempt as well?
Ms. Burton has joined us online, Councillor Patterson. Perhaps we can allow Mayor Burton to chime in on events going on right now in our township that she and her staff are aware of. And I'm certainly be open to hear what Constantine's sort of legal interpretation of some of that is too. Go ahead, Ms. Burton.
Thank you, Your Worship, and good evening, council and staff and public. So Peace Naturals and Agri-Farm are certainly our largest. There may be there are what are called micro producers that would be under 200 square meters, so about 2,000 square feet. I believe we have one of those. We do subject pretty much everyone regarding cannabis production to site plan control, depending on the circumstances. If it is a small micro and it's substantially distant from any adjacent property, we may not in that circumstance. But that's of the ones that we're aware, those are the ones that come to mind initially. So I'm not sure if that answers Councillor Patterson's question, but I think that's pretty much taking stock in what we have.
Yeah, there are some, I agree, Ms. Burton. certainly the requirements of Health Canada. When the license is provided to someone, they're required to notify the head of council. So occasionally I get emails that are really short that just say that they have a license on this address. And those emails are immediately forwarded to Ms. Burton and our clerk so that they can record them into the records of the township. Constantine, do you have any comment about the legal standing on that Mr. Patterson asked?
Yes, I can comment through your worship. So the bylaw would apply to new uses but not existing uses, and that is sort of by definition. It's the same way that zoning operates for a new use to prohibit a new use but not an existing use. If you rezone land, it has the same kind of function. So if you've legally established a use, it doesn't take that right away from you. But if you haven't legally established a use, then you wouldn't be able to for a period of a year. And then it depends on what comes out of that bylaw.
Thank you very much, Constantine. The Deputy Mayor is next, Councillor Patterson. If you want to hold on there, go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship. To Constantine, can you confirm for me, please, that if we pass this bylaw, that an individual could apply for an exemption to the bylaw? Is that correct? They could apply for an exemption? Could you confirm that?
Your thoughts on that?
So, yes, through your worship to the Deputy Mayor, there are municipalities have seen fit to grant exemptions here and there from interim control bylaws. It's really in the discretion of council, but there was nothing that would prohibit you from doing so.
Mayor Burton, did you want to speak on that too? No?
No, I'm happy to speak to that. There is actually two options available to council in regard to bylaws that are drafted for this evening, should you wish to entertain them. One option would apply to it's actually option 2 would apply to all facilities, including expansion of any of our existing facilities. The other existing legally established facilities. The other option is to exempt the legal established facilities so that should they come in for alterations or additions, that we would still be able to entertain that. That is option 1. That would be the option that I would be most comfortable recommending to council. But of course we take our direction from council.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Anybody else? And then Councillor Patterson. Mr. Broderick's next, then looking for anybody else okay, go ahead, John.
Just looking at this, am I to understand that approximately 30 out of the 440 municipalities in Ontario currently have a control bylaw?
Constantine or Mr. Elwood, would you be able to comment on that?
I'm happy to start on that one, and Kevin can chime in. Well, what we have is municipalities that have surveyed other municipalities and said, of the 30 or 40 we've surveyed, this is how many have acted and have regulated the land use. So it's not that they've done an exhaustive survey of 400. They have surveyed, the 30 or 40 they find most pertinent to them. And so Timmins, I think, did the most recent survey that I'm aware of in 2019, and it has surveyed 33 municipalities, and I believe something like 30 had passed. Keeping in mind that not every municipality is even ripe territory for these kind of operations to begin with.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I did point to John that there are 444 municipalities in Ontario. So any of the municipalities that were considering bylaws, you really looked within their region, and they looked, I believe, probably looked to other municipalities that probably have existing facilities or production farms. So whether they had taken action or whether they hadn't taken action. So it wasn't an exhaustive study of every municipality across the province. We were able to obtain information through the internet and municipal websites. But what it did demonstrate or show that the vast majority were taking action, as opposed to those that were just sitting back and allowing them to be open with no regulatory format for it.
That's a little misleading.
Okay, Mr. Broderick, did you? Okay. Mr. Patterson is next. Is there anybody else? Mr. Patterson, you had your card up. You still have a question?
I did. Going back to the original intent of my question, the question in my mind is, and maybe perhaps a review of how one becomes a licensed grower. And maybe at the beginning, I seem to think that you had to demonstrate you had the wherewithal, you had to have the facilities to do what the province was allowing at the very beginning. These days, do you get a license to grow and then establish a use?
Oh, I see what you mean. Yes, I don't think you can start a facility. I mean, there's probably a little bit of a gray zone in there, but I don't believe you can start production unless you have a license. So you need to get a license and then, you know, start production. Doesn't mean you don't line up your location and some of the other aspects that don't point to production.
My question is, if I may, so my question is also the opposite is, can you get a license without having any pre-work done to demonstrate your ability to build an operation?
So I'm not fully familiar with the details of the Health Canada regulation on that aspect of it, but I suspect you can. I suspect you can get a license without having built a facility.
Yeah, that's
I would go to Mayor Burton to help answer this question for you because she's got some experience in that. Ms. Burton?
Thank you, Your Worship. So I think generally for your medical license, you have to have your facilities ready in order to get your license, but you have to make, I believe there's an intent to get a license, and that has to be provided notice. And I think there may be some requirement in that regard. However, for someone who is growing their own under their own medical license, that goes back to the very origin of legalizing cannabis, I don't believe they necessarily need that. I'm not 100% sure on this, so I will have to check that out, and I can confirm with council and get back to you on that. But I think that in some cases, people who have a license to grow their own under the prescription that doctors gave them originally, this was something that was subject of a court challenge that went all the way to the Supreme Court, whereby the people that already had these current prescription medical licenses to grow their own, and they may have 200 plants, they may have 1,200 plants, they may be under a different whole basket of approvals.
And therein lies a lot of the confusion. Yes, Councillor Patterson.
So it's possible to have a scenario, and I think I agree we need to clarify it, that a person comes to Clearview with a license and then looks for a place to grow. That's what I'm trying to understand, because here we are. The reason I'm asking the question, not to go into the weeds, but it will take us a while to establish, if we go forward with this, an interim control bylaw. Okay, in the meantime, will more come in, and how do we monitor it?
Yeah, Ms. Burton, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. If we receive notice that someone is looking to do a license, typically what we get is a pre-consultation with them. And then we're able to explain what the rules in Clearview are, which would they be permitted in the agricultural and rural zone to actually do the growing and processing. They have to do site plan agreement with us. So often we will get a lot of that information up front with the legal growers. The illegal growers, of course, will not consult with us generally. And the only time that maybe we have someone who will consult with us as a legal grower is when they are growing for themselves, and then the federal government allows them to grow for themselves and 3 other persons to a maximum of 4 under their original medical license. We are not allowed to ask to see that medical license. It can be offered to us, but we are actually not allowed to require that. So it does put us a bit in the dark, because it is a freedom of information matter, because it is their medicine. My understanding is that sometimes some of the challenges under the illegal aspect of this is that people may have a prescription license and a medical license from Health Canada to grow their own, and that for 3 others, and maybe the maximum number of plants they can do is 800, and they may consult with us and might be seeking enough area to grow potentially, 20,000 plants. And it gets a bit tricky. And of course, being that we can't actually ask to see their license, it's difficult for us to assess that circumstance. So I think to go a little further with this, I think taking pause and passing an interim control bylaw so that we can do some research to look at this issue, and in particular determine through public meeting and through council whether or not this is the sort of thing we want to continue to allow in our agricultural and rural area, or is this something that we want to have in our industrial area, is something to look at. The other factor that we have to consider is what is our authority to restrict growing in the agricultural and rural area. If it is considered a crop, if there is under the normal farm practices, they say you can't stop us from growing outdoors. Processing in a building is another matter. We can look at setbacks and things like that, but we may find ourselves in a bit of a challenge in order to restrict the growing in the outdoor growing in the agricultural rural area, or potentially even a greenhouse. But the growing and the accessory and the processing and the accessory offices and all of those sorts of things are something certainly we can look at. We can look at standards in regard to barbed wire and security and what those requirements are today. So there's a number of things that we would have to look at in order to ascertain and bring forward a report to council for consideration and for the public to consider as well. So we're certainly asking the public, the ones that have been involved in this process so far, what are their concerns specifically so that we can try to narrow this down. And certainly staff are seeking some direction from council as to what you would like us to focus, should you pass the bylaw, what you would like us to focus our attention on.
Thank you.
All right, sounds like we're going to have a good discussion about that type of discussion there, Mara. Thank you. Any other members of council with some questions for our deputation as well as our staff? Seeing no other cards, before you go, gentlemen, I just want to state something about our community. We do have, as mentioned by Mayor Burton, we do have a couple of successful large operations in our community. I'd like to, give them a little bit of credit in the fact that they have recognized that speaking with the community and working with the community is a really good step in meeting compliance. And one of the steps that I think that they've both done that has been really significant is that they've attempted to mitigate odors emitting from their facilities. Both of them have scrubbers and that type of things in their facilities that are effectively working. It's not perfect, but it's certainly a lot better than some of the illegal operations that have popped up around our community. And I've seen and heard of challenges in other parts of Ontario with the odor abatement being the biggest concern. So anyway, I just want to state that for the record is that our two producers, both the Kronos people and the Met Farm people, are doing a great job at communicating with the residents. So that's a good positive thing. Nothing further than thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on this evening's deputation presentation. Mr. Elwood and Mr. Skelton and Constantine, he's already signed off. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you. So members of council, it is moments away from our public meeting. We will probably have a big discussion on item 13, which is currently scheduled at this time. So how about I ask for council to take what would it be, a 3-minute break, and we'll come back with our public meeting portion of the meeting. Is that agreeable to council? Mr. Deputy Mayor, you're going to be picking up the chair here in a moment. Okay, so we'll just take a few-minute break. We'll just keep the live feed rolling, but I'm going to shut off my microphone for a minute. Thank you.
Are we permitted to stick around for the start the meeting? Right? Should be. You're not allowed to talk.
All right, it is 6:30, and so I will ask members of council to rejoin us. And I guess members of our planning staff are standing by. Miss Rosamond Workman, there you are. Nice to see you. And I believe Mara is with us as well. And that's good. Okay, so Deputy Mayor Burton, it's a public meeting portion of our meeting. And as per our procedure, I will pass the chair over to the Deputy Mayor who conducts our public meetings at Clearview Township. So I will pass the chair over to you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I'd just like to start off with our procedures for our public meetings. We will now initiate the public meeting portion of tonight's agenda. We thank everyone who provided written comments ahead of tonight's public meeting. If you wish to be notified of the decision of the Corporation of the Township of Clearview on an application being discussed this evening, please contact the planning department or planning person in charge of the file. This information will be provided in the presentation. As identified in the notice of public meeting, please be advised that your written comments or request to be notified will form part of the public record. Your communication and any personal information therein will be made available to the public unless you expressly request its removal. If a person or public body does not make written submission to the township with respect to the proposed applications before a decision is made or a bylaw is passed, they are not entitled to appeal the decision to the local appeal tribunal and may not be added as a party to the hearing of an appeal unless, in the opinion of the board, there are reasonable grounds to do so. The following public meetings will involve a brief presentation by our planning staff, including a brief explanation of the written comments received, an opportunity for the applicant or their agent to present their application, respond to the written comments, and an opportunity for questions by council. We will now begin with the public meeting with respect to tonight's file, which is 2020-027-ZB 201 Huron Street in Stayner in the Township of Clearview. I believe our staff person involved is ready to go ahead. I believe that's you, Ms. Workman. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Please proceed. Please proceed.
Thank you. Good evening, all. Just give me a second to share my screen with you to just get the presentation on board here. There you go. So tonight we're here for a public meeting and it's zoning bylaw amendment 2020-027-ZB. And the subject lands is 201 Huron Street, Stayner in the Township of Clearview. The subject lands are shown in this map and they're shown in the hatched black and gray area. This land is described as 201 Huron Street in Stayner, the Township of Clearview. And for most, you will know this as the Stayner Public Library or the former Stayner Public Library. The proposal tonight is to zone the subject lands from institutional IN to general commercial exception, which will be shown as a C1-7. In addition to all of the general commercial C1 zoning uses, exception number 7 will add additional uses and will recognize some of the changes in the zoning provisions. The additional uses proposed are a daycare center and a museum. In terms of the proposed changes to the provisions, I've tried to show this in a table format. Under the provisions, the maximum front yard in the general commercial zone is generally 2 meters. In this case, we're looking to change that provision to 2.5 meters. Under minimum number of stories, under the normal general commercial zone, it is two stories. And in this case, we're looking to change it to 1. Maximum lot coverage is generally 65 meters under the general commercial zone. And in this case, we're looking to change it to 90%. And parking and loading under the general commercial zone. Generally, it depends on the uses and on the existing situation. For this zone or for this amendment, we are actually looking to zone the lands so that they are subject to 2.17, which is the historical downtown parking and loading exceptions. The main reason for these proposed changes to the provisions is that there is an existing building and we are just trying to recognize some of the existing features on that site. The proposed zoning schedule is going to be shown as this if council moves forward. And again, this is where the subject lands are shown in a black and white hatched out area, and it will go from a general commercial or from the institutional IN zone to the general commercial exception 07. The existing policy framework is that the current Township of Clearview official plan designation for this land is commercial, and the zoning bylaw category is institutional IN. Shows the map of the existing official plan map, and the property is outlined in the black, and it is commercial. The existing zoning bylaw map shows the subject lands outlined in red, and in this case, it is currently zoned institutional. Notice and circulation. Notice of the subject zoning bylaw amendment has been given in accordance with the Planning Act, and it was done on September 10th, 2020. In this case, the notice was put in the newspaper and we did mail outs to the agencies in the area. The details of the application and the supporting materials have been made available to the public online and have been circulated to all the relevant agencies. At this time in the presentation, I would comment on any of the comments that we've received. In this case, I have not received any comments, and so I will just move on. In terms of if anyone's watching and they would like to provide comments, this is my contact information, and please feel free to email me or give me a call if you have any questions. Now, just to explain a bit in terms of where we are in the review process. Right now, we're at the public meeting stage. And staff will consider comments received, and we will continue to do that until we bring forward a report and recommendation to council. When we bring a recommendation and report to council, council will either approve or deny that application, and then there will be a 20-day appeal period. If no appeals have been received, then the bylaw will come into force and effect. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosalind. Are you aware if the applicant is here tonight, is available?
Well, Deputy Mayor, the applicant is actually the Township of Clearview. So I do believe that CIO Steve Sage is here, excuse me, or Pamela Fettis.
So, yes, I was aware. That was maybe a dumb question asked. My question is Mr. CAO or anybody as the applicant want to make any comments or add any additional information? I don't see any hands. Anybody going up? Okay. Does any member of council wish to ask any questions, make comments? Going once, going twice. Okay, since nobody seems to have any further comments, this concludes the public meeting with respect to this file of this evening's agenda. We thank all who provided written comments and for their interest in this matter. All input received with regard to this proposal will be fully considered by staff in their recommendation and by council in their decision with respect to this application. A report regarding this proposal will be prepared for council who will make a decision concerning this matter at a future meeting, not tonight. We will now conclude the public meeting portion of this agenda, and I turn the chair back to His Worship the Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you
very much, Deputy Mayor, and thank you to our staff for presenting that information in regards to that public meeting. All right, Members of council, as per the agenda that we amended and moved a few items around, we're going to move to item number 13, which is the notice of motion. So I'm going to go right down to it. I'm going to read the motion at length. Yes.
A long ways away now.
Yeah, I'm going to read the motion. I'll ask for a mover and a secondary. I presume, Mr. McKechnie, you'll be the mover as you've made the motion, and then I will we'll have discussion. Now, did you want to speak? Go ahead there, Mr. Deputy, or sorry, Mr. McKechnie, go right ahead. Is something you want to add?
Just a matter of process, Your Worship. I'd like to make an amendment to the motion. Do I make that now, or do I make it after the motion has been read?
After the motion is read.
Yeah, absolutely. It's supposed to be made after it's read as it's been published. So you can make what's called a friendly amendment to the motion. The motion was printed on our previous council meeting and is also printed on the agenda for this meeting. So why don't we move it, second it, and then we can make those amendments or additions, changes, questions, etc., which is generally the procedure. Okay, very good. All right. Okay, I'm going to read the whole thing because that's what I have to do. Recommendation, whereas an interim control bylaw is a tool available to Ontario municipalities under Section 38 of the Planning Act to place a temporary freeze on the developments of lands while the municipality is studying or reviewing its land use policies. And whereas a number of properties in the municipality have been identified by Health Canada as certificates for growing cannabis for medical purposes, many of which proceed with limited public input or consultation with municipalities. And whereas Clearview Township has received complaints and inquiries related to existing and emerging cannabis production and processing facilities within the township. And whereas facilities for the production, processing, growing of cannabis are new and growing land use, which Clearview Township zoning and land use policies do not adequately address. And whereas staff require time to fully evaluate the implications of facilities for the production, processing, and growing of cannabis in Clearview Township, and in turn develop the appropriate land use policies, planning policies, and regulations for their location and use. Now, therefore, be it resolved that staff be directed to undertake a study of the land use planning policies in the township to develop appropriate land use planning policies and regulations for the production, processing, and growing of cannabis in the township, and staff prepare an interim control bylaw for adoption by council to restrict for a period of 1 year the development of cannabis production, processing, growing facilities within Clearview Township, with exemptions provided for general industrial zoning MG in order to allow staff the time necessary to study and develop appropriate land use planning policies and zoning regulations, and that such bylaw be brought to council no later than October 26th to be voted on. Mover by Councillor McKechnie. I will look for a seconder. Is there a seconder on the motion, please? Councillor Walker. Councillor Walker. Now, thank you, Councillor Walker, for the second. Councillor McKechnie, you mentioned you have an amendment. You want to throw it out there as a friendly, and we can pencil it in as the mover?
Thank you, Worship, and bear with me. I like to get the process proper. I don't want to take any chances. So anyway, the amendment to the motion, Council, on the bottom of page 4, the last line on the bottom of page 4 of the agenda, I would like to change. I would like to delete the words "with exemptions for general industrial zoning" and then in brackets MG, and I would like to add the words "with exemptions for legally existing cannabis operations."
Okay, the seconder comfortable with that change?
Your Worship, that's does that follow in with number 1 that was suggested by our planning department with option 1? That's all.
Yeah, I agree. So procedural, if I can, hang on a second there, Mayor. We've added these onto the agenda, which are our option 1 and option 2 of this proposed bylaw. We'll have that discussion following finishing the notice of motion from Councillor McKechnie. So all we're looking for here, Councillor McKechnie's proposed a.
Yeah, I'm okay with that friendly change.
Okay, so that's anybody else, any questions on Councillor McKechnie's friendly? So we'll call that recorded as a friendly. Mr. McKechnie, did you want to speak to your motion beyond that?
No,
sorry,
I was
I
just
cut off
going to
Mara.
answer.
Sorry, just a minute. Did I cut off Mara? Did you have anything? Okay, all right. Sorry, go ahead, Doug. Mr. McKechnie.
Yeah, no, I was just going to answer Councillor Walker's question. And the reason why I made the amendments was I was trying to align it more closely with what the bylaw could look like and such. So anyway, I was just trying to tighten it up there. So I was just, that's the answer, I suppose, for Councillor Walker. Yes.
All right. Okay, perfect. Would you like to speak to your motion? I always give the councillors the opportunity to speak to their notice of motion. So if you want to speak to it, go right ahead.
All right. Thank you, Your Worship. And thanks for letting me allow to speak to the motion. So first of all, Council, why does this interim control bylaw and subsequent study matter? So as mentioned earlier, cannabis production in Canada has grown quickly since legalization 2 years ago. It sparked a lot of investment and rapid growth without widespread guidelines for municipalities or best management practices by growers. And rapid growth has meant a wild west of regulations, and other municipalities are now putting the brakes on cannabis production approvals. Interim control bylaws have already been implemented in Pelham, Niagara Falls, Grimsby, Springwater, Armour Township, East Gwillimbury, New Tecumseh. There's probably more as the list is expanding rapidly. So what is the concern? First of all, this motion requesting an interim control bylaw is not site-specific. Residents in other rural municipalities have expressed concerns about water, traffic, lights, the funky pervasive odor, not to mention the fact that these facilities do not fit in with the traditional agricultural landscape that many municipalities are trying to retain. Now, Wayne Caldwell, a professor in rural planning and development at the University of Guelph, says in agcanada.com, an online farming magazine, and I'll quote him, quote, "For traditional farming, whether cash crops or livestock, the rules have evolved over 200 years. Cannabis producers have no rules or regulations. They do what they want," unquote. He goes on to say that municipalities don't seem to understand the gravity of risk to people's livelihood. Part of the concern is that cannabis operations are more industrial than agricultural in nature, that they have the same exemptions that agricultural activities have from site planning requirements and pay taxes at the agricultural rate. The September issue of Better Farming quotes Trevor Brand. Actually, I won't even go into that. Well, yeah, sure I will. I've started it now. He's a grower of crash crops in Lambton County. And he says, we had no say in the change of use of the facility. The first issue was the lights. Now the main issue is the smell in the air conditioning units that the facility has running 24/7. David Munshaw, who grows carrots in the Holland Marsh, has similar frustrations with cannabis operations that popped up in his area. Mr. Munshaw says, everything looks shady. They're putting up greenhouses saying they're going to grow vegetables and then they grow marijuana. So members of council, does this sound familiar? Even Clearview's own Keith Curry, a resident of Ward 1 and president of the Ontario Federation of Agriculture, told Better Farming magazine that the Ontario Federation of Agriculture is still seeking input from all involved across the industry, as well as its members, to assist in determining the right direction for the organization. The Christian Farmers Federation of Ontario submitted a letter to Ernie Hardeman, Minister of Agricultural, Food and Rural Affairs, on the issue of cannabis production. The letter stated, quote, cannabis facilities present an altogether different level of disruption compared with the regular farming practices of more traditional commodities, which are already governed by minimum distance separation standards, unquote. The farm organization requested the establishment of similar rules for cannabis growing operations. So what needs consideration? Clearview Township finds itself in a perfect storm. Cannabis production is a new land use that is not addressed by the township's zoning regulations or official plan provisions. We have no official plan policies and no zoning standards that are specific to cannabis production facilities. Other municipalities have already acted to amend their land use policies to address the problem. Clearview Township is rapidly becoming an outlier amongst municipalities and is in danger of becoming an attractor municipality for those facilities which are seeking to avoid compliance with land use regulations elsewhere. The questions to be answered in the study, because the study has to go along with this interim control bylaw. So what zones and questions to be answered are what zones and areas of the municipality are appropriate for land use? Setbacks and performance standards can be established to address issues such as odor, signage, noise, lighting, and traffic. Should site plan approval be required? We also, and lastly, we also need to consider the existing cannabis production facilities are changing the character of the rural agricultural area. Residents have compared cannabis production facilities with industrial uses in terms of their appearance and operation. Now, at least, as mentioned earlier, at least 30 Ontario municipalities, probably more, have implemented land use planning provisions relating to cannabis, and at least 12 other municipalities have approved interim control bylaws. I would argue that regulation of cannabis facilities is now considered a best practice expected of an Ontario municipality. This interim control bylaw will, if approved, temporarily suspend cannabis production facility development with exemptions for facilities which are currently lawfully used for such purpose. This will allow the subsequent land use study to fully evaluate the implications of cannabis production facilities across all areas of the township, in particular rural and agricultural zones. Thank you for your consideration on this motion, and I urge you to vote in favor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor. Members of council, do you have any questions to Councillor McKechnie or to our staff who are available to help us with this interesting topic? Yes, Mr. Deputy Mayor, and anybody else? I'm looking for anybody else. Go ahead, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship. My question is to the Director of Planning, Mrs. Burton. Could you just clarify, give us the Coles Note version of the difference between option 1 and option 2, please?
Yes, through the mayor. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Burton. So option 1 would apply to all the facilities within all cannabis production facilities within the township, with the exception of the legally established facilities. So in my mind, that would be Peace Naturals, Agri-Farm, and I believe there's another micro production facility, but it's quite small. That's the one that can only be 200 square meters. Option 2 would restrict the legal ones from any expansions during the interim control bylaw. So it would affect them as well. They would not be exempt from it.
Thank you. That's pretty clear.
Okay. Anybody else with any questions or comments? All right. If I may, to Councillor McKechnie, your motion and your presentation just now talks about Clearview Township being threatened with this. I want to point out that Clearview Township actually was a leader in medical cannabis research going back to 2006, 2007, when this township entertained hearing from an entrepreneur who started what was then becoming known as Peace Naturals. And so it was certainly an evolution that's happened in our township right up to 2009-10 when they really got started. And it's certainly been a journey in our township. And I'm sure that we have learned a lot. I'm sure we've made some mistakes. But I also believe that we as council, and this council, the previous councils, the mayors, the previous mayors have all been guided by good advice from our staff. And I think that you'll agree with me by seeing the work that our staff member, Mayor Burton, put into preparing these bylaws that are going to be presented tonight. So I think there's a lot of thought that went into this. It's also something too that's it's difficult as a municipality because this is so much out of our control. When the federal government made the changes, and the federal enforcement agencies, the RCMP and Health Canada's regulations and inspectors stepped up to the plate. And then our own policing operations here in Ontario, the Ontario Provincial Police, have all had a difficult time creating any type of resolution to any enforcement action that brings any real change. Certainly we've seen great cooperation from the people that have stepped to our counter and made their presentation and made their points through the staff, and then presented it to previous councils, including this council, any changes that they wanted to make in their facilities. And then you heard me mention earlier about they've also been open to talking to the community. And I know Councillor Leishman's not with us right now in this meeting, but she has certainly attended many community meetings where the people that operate Peace Naturals have met with the public and heard from them and dealt with their concerns. And by the way, some of those concerns are as simple as traffic management on the 12th concession. They move their driveways, they change their schedules a little bit so that they could handle the additional traffic on the road. And so they're trying to mitigate some of the problem. So I just wanted to put it out there, Mr. McKechnie, so you understood that I believe, while perhaps our zoning bylaws and our our actual laws about rural living may not be as restrictive as you maybe want, I think it's a good idea that we allow our staff to research this and prepare some of their good advice through best practices and consulting with other municipalities to create some of those clarity in the zoning for our rural area. So I'd certainly give them the credit to go out and do that. So fundamentally, I support what you're saying about us doing this this pause in the process. But I do think that we have done a really good job so far. And so I think that it's just leaves us down the road to making further changes that'll be satisfactory for the enjoyment of our citizens and our residents. Anybody else? Any other comments? Mr. McKechnie, you go ahead. Oh, now I got some cards.
Yeah.
Boy, let me speak and then everybody wants to jump in. Go ahead, Doug.
No, I just wanted to comment. I think you and I are on the same page there. That was why I put the amendment in, because I recognize the Peace Naturals and Agri Farms. I don't want to take anything away from them. They're doing well, and I want to see them continue to do well. And I think, but when we have the land use study, then we can see how we want further the introduction of further cannabis production facilities, regulated when they come into the township. So, and that'll be up to this council with the input from, the director of planning and the public to determine. But no, definitely, that was why why I put the amendment in, your worship. I didn't want to take anything away from Peace Naturals or Agri Farms. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, so I saw Broderick and Deneen. I'm looking for anybody else with any other cards. Go ahead, Mr. Broderick. Mr. Burton, I recognize you too. Go ahead, Mr. Broderick.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm just curious if there's any distinction between the agricultural growth of hemp and cannabis.
Good question. Ms. Burton, what do you know about hemp versus cannabis?
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, hemp, my understanding is that hemp is not a controlled substance under Health Canada. So it's not something that we do regulate. We don't treat it the same. It's not in the definition of our bylaw for interim control. It's not a product that is used for medical purposes or for spiritual purposes, for lack of a better word. It's more for industrial purposes and clothing and things like that. So we don't treat them the same as we do with cannabis, hemp, that is.
All right. Does that help you, Mr. Broderick?
So then it would be exempt from this bylaw. Am I correct in that understanding?
Through your worship to Councillor Broderick, yes, that is correct.
Thank you.
Fair enough. Yes, hemp and cannabis, while they're similar plants, are not the same when it comes to this proposed bylaw. Ms. Deneen. Hello there, Mrs. Deneen.
Yeah. So through your worship to Mara, please. Are you aware of, if we went with option B, are you currently aware of what that would limit Peace Naturals or Agri Farm from doing? Like, have they got anything planned for just in the next year that you're aware of? Because otherwise, that gives the micro production of the opportunity to look into more and do more as well at this point? And would they be able to apply and do more to their micro production as well? Just wondering if there's anything in the works that you know of. If we picked option B, would it greatly affect Peace Naturals and AgriFarm? I guess.
Go ahead, Mara.
Thank you, Your Worship, through to Councillor Janine. Yes, actually, Peace Naturals is doing a renovation right now, and they are looking at doing, well, they've expanded their parking lot, and I believe they're going to be looking at doing a bit of an addition or another building, not anywhere near the size of what they have now, but I believe they're doing some smaller work, so it would affect them. AgriFarm, they have been doing some sort of working with us, looking towards doing some additional sort of micro grow and things like that on their property, and potentially on other properties. So on their existing property and what they already have approved, they would, if we brought in option 1, it could potentially affect both AgriFarm and Peace. If those 2 businesses were looking to do a use on another property, they would be affected by the bylaw, I believe, because the interim control bylaw really exempts their existing, on option 1, exempts their existing businesses on the current property. It wouldn't necessarily allow them to expand onto additional properties. That is my understanding of it. Honestly, I wasn't expecting the question, but it's an excellent question, so I'm doing the best I can to answer it. I'm hoping, did I answer all of your question, or was there a second part to that?
No, that did answer what I was, but what I am concerned about is the micro production. They wouldn't be able to go any further than what they've got their license for, and they wouldn't be able to expand elsewhere either. So
under option 2, they wouldn't be allowed to expand on their current properties, and under option 1 and 2, they won't be allowed to do facilities on additional or different lands.
That's great, thank you.
Okay. So I have Mr. Burton next, and I'm looking, is there anybody else? Mr. Patterson is not online, so I'm just making sure that he's still with us. Mr. Burton, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. So my question is to Councillor McKechnie and Councillor Walker. I just want to clarify this motion that's forward. It has 2 options. So I'm trying to clarify that Councillor McKechnie, you're supporting option 1. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes, I'm supporting option 1, and I think that's a more flexible option for Naturals and AgriFarms.
Right, and Councillor Walker, that's you're also seconding the motion to support option 1. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct, Your Worship, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just wanted clarification.
Good job. No, I appreciate that. As I said earlier, we are going to deal with this notice of motion as presented, and the outcome of that discussion. We have added these 2 bylaws onto our agenda, and so it's pretty clear that option number 1 will be the next item on our agenda. Okay. So is there anything further then on the notice of motion as been read, moved and seconded, and discussion? Councillor Patterson, welcome back. Nice to see you there. Did you have anything further to add? Anybody else? I think we've pretty well wrapped it up. All right, seeing none. Council, we've got a motion. I don't feel I need to reread the entire motion. That's comfortable for everybody. So the mover and seconder is Councillor McKechnie. Councillor Walker is the seconder, and I'm prepared to call the motion. Is there anybody else? Any other questions? Thank you, Mayor Burton. Oh, yes, go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
So, excuse me, Your Worship, and thank you, but I'm a little confused because my understanding is this option 1 and option 2 are amendments to the original notice of motion. Is that correct?
Madam Clerk, would you help me clarify? As I understood, Council adopted these 2 on-desk items as option 1 and option 2, and so we will need a a motion to accept these bylaws, which are number 2064. Is that correct, Madam Clerk?
Thank you, Your Worship. So when the motion was put on the table, Deputy Mayor, the mover and seconder agreed to amend the wording at the bottom of the motion. And that was to give the direction that option number 1 bylaw would be coming forward afterwards. So the wording was changed at the bottom to remove with exemptions provided for general industrial zoning MG, and it was substituted for with exemptions for legally existing cannabis operations. So that would be the 2 large manufacturing facilities in Clearview Township and the micro, sorry, I don't know what the terminology is, the micro operations as well.
Your Worship, if I may, so to clarify, supporting the motion that's on the floor now is basically supporting option number 1. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And then we're having a separate vote for option number 1 or option number 2. Is that
because
that's where my confusion is coming in?
Well, if I can help, the issue is that we're receiving a notice of motion right now. What we're being asked to do is create a bylaw. So it's a bylaw is obviously a separate motion, right? So
thank you, Your Worship. You just clarified that for me. Thank
it's
you.
an interim control bylaw, so it's a separate bylaw. So I'll need a separate motion. Does that seem clear for everybody?
Got it. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry for the confusion and trying to clarify.
Oh, no. I'll ask again. Anybody else that did anything else? More comfortable? All right. I'll just state that thank you, Councillor McKechnie, for bringing this forward. Members of council, I'm prepared to call the motion. All those in favor? And that motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor McKechnie. So as per our procedural bylaw, I'm going to bring forward a bylaw right now, which is underneath option number 1. I'm just checking here because I asked the clerk to forward it to me and maybe she has. Here it is. I will read it to you, council. Be it resolved that bylaw number 20-64 being a bylaw to pass an interim control bylaw to prohibit the use of lands, buildings, and structures for a cannabis operation pursuant to section 38 of the Planning Act, RSO 1990, CP 13, as amended, on any and all lands located within the township of Clearview, item option 1, be presented and read a first, second, and third time and finally pass on the 5th day of October 2020. Anybody like me to reread it? You got it okay? Just for the record, this will actually be part of the minutes, so it'll be recorded there as part of the minutes. Can I have a mover and seconder for the motion, please? That'll be Mr. McKechnie, and I'm going to go with Mr. Lamers. I saw his card first. Now, I do have a question. I know in a bylaw situation, we don't normally have questions, but I do have a question to both Mara and the clerk. I want to clarify, if you would, Miss Burton and or the clerk. By passing this bylaw, this is an unusual tool, and a municipality does have the option to use an interim control bylaw. Passing this bylaw, as we heard earlier, is in effect for only 1 year and can be extended. There'll be no appeal period for the 1 year beginning when I sign this bylaw. And further, that council at any time can withdraw the bylaw. Is that correct, Mayor Burton? Oh, your microphone's muted now. Sorry.
Sorry, thank you, Your Worship. You could pass a bylaw that would rescind this bylaw, I believe is how that would happen.
Yeah, so that's correct, Ms. Clerk. You agree with that too? So just to be clear, again, it is an unusual tool, but it's a very valuable tool in the event that the municipality needs to study something. And so that being clear for the public, this bylaw can be withdrawn if the council is satisfied that we have clarified this issue within the 12-month period by simply bringing forward a bylaw to rescind it. Everybody clear on that? All right, thank you. Council, I've read the bylaw. I've answered the procedural question about the bylaw. We've got a mover and seconder in McKechnie and Lamers, so I'm prepared to call the motion. All those in favor? And that motion carries. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Burton, for all of your work on this. I look forward to hearing about all of the work you're going to be doing to help us sort this all out too. So thank you. Thank you, council, and thank you, staff. All right, members of council, we're going to go back to our agenda, which I believe we're way back at adopting the minutes of previous meetings, which is item number 7. All right, so approval of the minutes of our, yes, Deputy Mayor, go ahead.
Yes, Your Worship, thank you. I wish to make a minor amendment to the minutes. I felt there was something that was just a little bit short in the recording.
All right, yeah, sure, go ahead and speak to it right now if you like.
Thank you, Your Worship. I appreciate that. My motion that was passed at the last meeting regarding the NEC, it states that Schedule B, that Schedule B be amended to indicate roads that are protected by the NEC. And it stops there. I believe it should continue to say where ATVs are prohibited. So just that it clarifies that it's protected and ATVs are prohibited on those protected roads.
Okay, I don't recall that exact wording, but it makes sense. I appreciate it. All right, if that's acceptable to everyone on council here, there's a small amendment. All right, then I will call the approval of the agenda. Approval of the minutes of the meeting. Recommendation be it resolved that council of the Township of Clearview hereby approves the minutes of the council meeting as presented for September the 23rd, which was our budget discussion, and September the 28th, which was our last council meeting. Deputy Mayor and Councillor Patterson first.
I'm sorry, Your Worship.
We got a movers here yet. Who's moving?
I'm sorry, Your Worship. It should be as amended. Minutes as amended. I'm sorry.
Fair enough. I haven't even got a mover yet. Who's the mover? I have a green card for a mover on this. Councillor Lamers. Is there a seconder? And we'll go with the Deputy Mayor. And that would be an as amended, courtesy of the Deputy Mayor's friendly amendment for his motion that happened on the 28th. And Councillor Patterson, did you want to speak on something?
I did want to speak to clarification in the meeting on September 23rd.
Go ahead.
So as you know,
did you want to bring that up on a business arising, or is this just a clarification on the minutes?
Clarification on the minutes.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
So as you know, I did not attend that meeting, and in my email to council, I explained, and I would like it to read accurately in the minutes, that due to concerns for the in-person meeting format during this period of the pandemic, that was the reason for my absence. Not that I was unable, I was unwilling.
Okay, Mr. Patterson is recorded as being unwilling to attend the meeting.
No, what I said was the correction I put forward, and I sent a copy of my correction to the deputy clerk so that she wouldn't have to copy it down.
Yeah.
The wording that I would like to see is due to concerns for the in-person meeting format during this period of the pandemic.
Okay, that's an understandable edit. No problem. To be clear, for the record, any member of council can attend the meeting or not, and that was clearly shared. And so we accepted your email, and Mr. McKechnie, in fact, presented your comments at the meeting and did a very good job representing your comments too. So thank you, Councillor Patterson, for that. Anything further? Seeing none, then I'll call the motion. All those in favor? That motion carries. Thank you. Business arising from the minutes, if any? No business arising since we've made our little amendments. Very good. Communications from the mayor. Council, we did have a closed session meeting just prior to our council meeting starting. Session started at 5 o'clock as a closed session. And I do have a report that comes out of that closed session. And for this report, I would ask for our CAO to join us, and Mr. Sage is here. Nice to see you, Mr. Sage. Would you like to pick up the report at that time? Right there, sir.
Yes, Your Worship, I would. So council, staff, members of the public, earlier this afternoon at an in-camera meeting, I formally provided my retirement notice to the council of the Township of Clearview. Effective Christmas Eve, 2020, that will be my last day of work at Clearview Township. I want to take the opportunity to thank everyone, particularly council, previous councils. I've had a lot of mentors, too many to mention, and a lot of people from the public that have allowed us to accomplish what we've accomplished over the 30 years that I've been here. When I leave, there will be a lot of projects and processes, too numerous to mention, in what I'm going to take some pride in when I'm no longer an employee of the municipality. And as you can imagine, that list is 30 years long, so it's extensive. But I want to thank everyone. I'm going to be here for 2 or 3 months yet. Wish council luck in finding a replacement for the position. And I want to thank particularly my staff. They are terrific. We've built a pretty great team at Clearview. And if there's a lull between my absence and the next CAO, you have a lot of competent people, council, that you can turn to that will probably forget more than I will ever know on some subjects. So again, thank you very much.
Mr. Sage, thank you very much. On behalf of the community, I want to, first of all, congratulate you on your decision. I'm sure it's something that you and your family have had to discuss, and I'm sure Jane is probably wondering, oh my goodness, what am I going to do with Steve being home all the time? So I wish her the best of luck too. And certainly over the next couple of months, we have a few projects that we're still going to be working on with you. And I know that our community will be drawing upon your experience and your input. And I'm also quite confident that you're still going to be around our community for many years to come. So thank you for all your service to this community, and we'll look forward to working with you over the next couple of days.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Members of council, any comments? It was a good in-camera session, so the public knows, and each of our members of council spoke to Mr. Sage and offered him congratulations. And so we certainly do have some work yet ahead, but this council will certainly begin the process of finding a new CAO. I have to tell you, it is no replacement for Mr. Sage, but certainly a new CAO, because Mr. Sage has obviously, after 30 years, demonstrated that he is integrally part of what we do here at this township. So we will be working on that right away. Thank you, Mr. Sage. Appreciate that. So that's it from our in-camera session, and that's all I have on any communications from the mayor at this time. It's only been a week since we met last, so there isn't anything that's pressing. Other than I do want to report that I will continue to meet with the physician recruitment committee as part of the Town of Blue Mountains. I've been invited to sit on that committee, so that's something that I will be looking forward to working with as we try to provide physicians for our community. Perhaps we'll have more during ward reports, but at this time, that's what I have for communications from the mayor. And I'll go to item number 10, which is our county reports for information. Item 10.1 is the county council highlights. So Mr. Deputy Mayor, Deputy Warden Burton, would you have anything you'd like to add to the highlights that are on our agenda?
I do not, Your Worship, other than the highlights that are there. But I would just like to say that the governance, as chair of the governance committee, I've called another governance meeting to review where the governance committee goes from here as far as the provincial review of governance for the county. So other than there will be a meeting on the 20th, that's about all I have to report at this stage.
All right, thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. Any questions to the Deputy Mayor about county reports, county information? All right, I know that keeps the Deputy Mayor very busy. Am I there? Have you hearing me okay? I hear you put your hands up. Thank you. It keeps the Deputy Mayor very busy, so thank you for serving at the county as our Deputy Warden. Recommendation be it resolved, the Council of the Township of Clearview hereby receive the County Council Highlights Report September 2020 for information. I'm mover and seconder on the motion. Councillor Deneen, Councillor McCaffrey, and all those in favor. Thank you. The motion carries. Moving on to item number 11 on our agenda is our ward reports. So we're going to go around the table here, and I'm going to start with Councillor Lamers. Hello, John. How you doing there?
Thank you, Your Worship. It's only been a week since we've had our last meeting, so not very many meetings. I've just had a couple discussions with Lucas Linus about speeding on Michael Crescent on the town line. It's only a quarter-mile stretch, but people seem to want you to use that as a race strip. And then I'll be talking to Terry Vachon about people looking for a dog park in New Lowell. That's about all I have for today.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And I wish people would slow down. I tell you, speeding. Thank you very much for that. All right, Councillor Patterson will be next. Councillor Patterson, then Walker, then Broderick.
Other than the subjects that we've got tonight, I have no other items to report to council that I worked on in the last week.
All right, thank you. Councillor Walker is next.
Thank you, Your Worship. No, nothing has happened as far as meetings. I talked to a few people with regards to interim control bylaw and the ATV as I have in the past, but nothing else at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Broderick's next, then followed by McKechnie. Go ahead, Mr. Broderick.
Thank you, Your Worship. No, the library board meeting was canceled, so I have nothing to report either.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor. I apologize. I couldn't attend that meeting myself, so we'll get back to it, I'm sure. McKechnie is next, and then Mr. Burton. Go ahead, Mr. McKechnie.
Thank you, Your Worship. Nothing much for me either, other than to say that it's a very special day for me today. It's my birthday. It's a milestone birthday, the big one. And anyway, it's happy birthday to me. Thank you.
Councillor McKechnie, I didn't know that. I'm going to mark that in my calendar, so now I have that. And it's a milestone. So are you turning 40?
Let's call it the Cash for Life milestone.
Congratulations. Happy birthday from council.
Thank you.
Mr. Burton.
I have not a whole lot else that other than I will be attending. I've been invited to attend the grand opening of Foodland in Creemore on Friday morning. As you know, there's been major renovations done to that facility, and I've been asked to attend, and I will be attending. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'll be joining you there at that. I got an invitation as well, so I plan to be there, and I will have my mask on. So there you go. Councillor Janine, you're next. Sorry, I think your mic's muted again. Here we are.
Thank you very much. Happy birthday, Doug. That's 65. Wow. I said it. Nothing much, as everybody says. It's just been a week. Nottawa Hall Board will have our Zoom meeting this Thursday. And someone was questioning people parking on our little pathway back to our playground, our newly put in pathway back in Nottawa Ballpark. And I was talking to Terry as well, and Terry said there will be signage and a possibility even of a fence along that pathway. So it's all in due process. So it will be there. Just have to take our time and be patient with it. And that's it. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Janine. All right, I look forward to seeing that and hearing more about that. I have very little else to add other than it is Fire Prevention Week, and our fire prevention officer has arranged for Sparky, the fire dog, and our two fire chiefs for the day to pop by the township office on Friday. I'm not exactly sure what time exactly, but nevertheless, there are two youngsters from our community who have participated in the coloring contest. And so we will be designating them chief for the day as part of their fire prevention program. And so I look forward to joining them and joining Sparky the fire dog here at the township office for a little photo opportunity. And I also want to mention too, of course, that I did mention this last week that it would have been Small Hall Festival Week. And I want to thank Amanda Murray for producing a little video that recognizes our volunteers that help our small halls. So that little video has been out there and circulating around on social media. So it was certainly my pleasure and honor to participate in that and recognize the volunteers that contributed to our community. So that's all I have at this time. Underneath department reports, we've got a few items to discuss tonight, Council. So let's get right to it. Our first item is underneath community services. We have a site plan approval for 2241 County Road 42. Recommendation, be it resolved that Council of the Township of Clearview hereby one, receive CS 043 2020 report for information. And item 2, approve the telecommunications tower site plan by Alex Martin Limited, dated September the 4th, 2020, and direct staff to provide a letter of compliance for the municipal consultation process that has been satisfied and mail it to the consultant Sarah Duncan, Forbes Bro Inc., and to Industry Canada, also known as Industry Science and Economic Development Canada. Okay, can I have a mover and seconder on this motion? I see Nick has joined us. That'd be Councillor Broderick, Councillor McKechnie. Councillor Broderick and McKechnie. Mr. Ainley, would you like to review this for us? If there's any questions, Council, I'm sure I'll have for you. Go ahead, Mr. Ainley.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's not too much to add. So the applicant has successfully navigated our telecommunications protocol. All comments we received have been addressed either through the municipal staff or through the applicant themselves. And we feel confident that it does represent a good expansion of the telecommunications infrastructure in the township and is an orderly development. And we'd just like to recommend concurrence to Industry Canada as well as to the applicant.
All right, thank you very much. Is there any questions to Mr. Ainley or questions of the report? Seeing none from members of council. Thank you, Mr. Ainley. I appreciate that. We will call the motion then, council. Members of council, I'm prepared to vote. All those in favor? And that motion carries. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ainley. Have a good night.
Thank you very much. You.
All right. Public Works Department. This is the Blue Sky assessment results in regards to the Creemore wastewater treatment plant. Recommendation. Be it resolved that Council of the Township of Clearview hereby one, receive the Creemore wastewater treatment plant Blue Sky assessment result report for information, and item 2, direct staff to work with consulting engineers and others as appropriate to implement the actions of the R.J. Burnside September 25th, 2020 memorandum attached to Schedule 1 to this report. All right, can I get a mover and seconder to get this on the floor? I see we've got some staff and guests, Mr. Lamers and Mr. McKechnie. Mr. Lamers and Mr. McKechnie, mover and seconder. Mr. Ron, I'd like to start with you. Thank you, Mr. Ron, for this extensive report. This is something that the community has certainly been waiting to hear, as from your previous reports about the condition of the Creemore wastewater treatment facility. And thank you for updating us. Would you like to review some of the items in your report, Mr. Ron?
Thank you, Your Worship. I felt it was important to inform council with the report in its entirety. There's been some development pressures. Developers are wanting to go ahead. There's a couple that are actually waiting for our answer to the sewer plant. I think there was some anticipation that the Blue Sky report was actually going to give us answers to timing, how much we could add right away, those kind of things. What it did do was, it provided me a lot of relief. At least now we have some direction, right? There's been some ongoing issues with what's happening there. R.J. Burnside are actually leading us in what to do. Jeff Langlois, he's here to answer questions, as is Melody Johnson. Melody's done an outstanding job of assessing the processes and the effluent, and there's some surprises to me. Just honestly, I've explained how difficult and complex this plant is, but some of the things I saw were eye-opening. I think council's heard me for years complaining about some of the treatment equipment. Maybe it hasn't been the treatment equipment all along. So glad that this report is now available to use, and I would like council to ask Jeff and Melody any questions about the report.
Very good. Well, before we get to that questions, but I'd like to go to Jeff and Melanie. Welcome to our council meeting, and thank you for your report and your work on this so far. Perhaps I'll start with Jeff. Perhaps you could explain sort of some of the challenges that are facing our community when it comes to this wastewater treatment plant, and what expectations we may have of some positive results out of this. Jeff?
Certainly, thank you. Your worship, members of council, staff, and any public that's still hanging around. And happy birthday, Councillor McKechnie. So yes, I was going to speak just for a couple of minutes to outline the work that was Blue Sky undertook recently and our review of their report. And then at a very high level, the summary of the 4 or 5 page memo that's included with the report to council, just to give an overview of what it says, not to go through it detail by detail by detail. So as we've mentioned, Melody Johnson is here. She's a partner with Blue Sky Engineering and Consulting, and Burnside has worked with her on a number of projects over a long time frame. She has about 15 years of experience. She's a PN and holds a master's in science as well. So we often partner with Melody when we need a little more process expertise than we have in-house at Burnside. So she was good enough to get engaged on this, and I think as Mike commented, has done an excellent job in terms of the report that she's pulled together for us. At a very high level, it did confirm a lot of the things that we suspected in our previous report as Burnside, but she did take it to another level in terms of scrutiny and detail, and that's what we were looking for in terms of getting good answers to make decisions moving forward. So we received that report and provided it to council with the summary on September the 17th. And so in her report, she outlines her review of the background data that was available to her. She characterizes the inflows to the plant, as well as looking at the contributions from Creemore Spring Brewery, sort of essentially their effluent, as is reported to the township on a quarterly basis. She also looked at trying to estimate the future flows and loadings under a number of scenarios at the Creemore wastewater treatment plant moving forward, which included, in varying, depending on the scenario, no growth or some growth from CSB, and no growth or some growth from development, and a mix of the two. So there's lots of detail in there, but they are just assumptions based on what we know, but does help in terms of forming a work plan and developing some high-level recommendations. So the principal conclusion in the report is that the plant as it stands today has very little capacity to handle more wastewater or stronger wastewater than it's currently receiving today. In the report, we do note that CSB's effluent is a significant contributor in terms of its impact on what the plant sees and what a plant has to treat. We also noted in the report that the brewery is not yet running at its full expanded capacity. Some of you will recall that they did expand a number of years ago to provide more brewing capacity, and certainly their production levels have increased, but based on a few conversations with them, they're not running at 100% of that capacity every day. And given the agreements that we have with them to date, being the township has with Creemore Springs, it's foreseeable that they would start to contribute more as production goes up higher. That's sort of addressed in their existing agreement. And in fact, it's a key point moving forward here, because the extent to which they contribute more flow or stronger flow under their existing agreement would dramatically impact what we need to do at the existing facility to accommodate some, if any, development. So that's a key point of moving forward, is to engage with them on a discussion. As I've noted, we've talked to them a few times over the course of the study. We did give them a heads up that the study would be at council today, and we've also taken the liberty of setting up a meeting with them, along with Mike and Melody, and I plan to meet the manager from Creemore next Thursday at their facility as kind of the first of the next steps, and recognizing just how important their forecast is to our forecast. Key things that were kind of identified in there. So there were a number of scenarios that were played out. One of them was essentially a shorter term scenario, kind of saying, if we don't spend a whole lot of money on a whole lot of things, what can we do in the short term? The key premise there is that there isn't a whole lot more flow or stronger flow coming from Creemore Springs, that they sort of stay as is, in which case we believe if that proves to be a good forecast, we could undertake a number of operational and small capital improvements at the plant that might provide capacity for possibly up to 250 additional persons in the short term. So that might be ready in a year to get those upgrades completed, but we do need to kind of confirm the assumptions with Creemore, and then also kind of check in with the Ministry of Environment and our town staff and town operations on that one. But it does provide some hope if we can ascertain that assumption on what Creemore Springs is going to do. And then there's also a section in the report about longer range and, you know, how do we get the plant running at its full number of 860 cubic meters per day. To get there, there would be a lot of capital work involved, possibly even triggering an environmental assessment depending on the land needs. So that's a much longer range solution. And a lot of what we proposed in the timeline in our memo is sort of like the short-term plan and then the longer plan. And the outcome of the short-term plan will inform and require us to revisit our long-term plan as we sort of get better information and better assumptions. So we did provide a fairly detailed action plan that would start this fall. And if you follow it all the way through to significant capital expansions, it runs out to, I think, the winter of 2026 before a major capital a major construction project would be completed at the plant. So I won't go through each element, but again, that first step is to look at the short-term sort of lower cost improvements, process modifications, such as just adjusting a few things in the plant, essentially operational changes, changing valves and levels and things like that, as opposed to spending money on equipment. But there was a desire or a recommendation to replace some membranes in the near term to help with that, and then further to study them in a little more detail during that cold weather stress season at the end of April or sort of, late winter, early spring, right? End of March, April, May. That has proven to be a problematic time of year, and the thought was to try to make sure we have a high quality study of the membranes during that window. So pretty high level. It's a big report and it's pretty technical. Obviously, at any time, I'd be happy to answer a question, whether it's tonight or on a phone call from staff or council. But we do have Melody with us here from XCG. And at this point, I thought I would just ask Melody if there was anything there that I omitted, skipped over, or misinterpreted at a high level, if she wanted to speak up. So are you there, Melody?
I am. Nice to see you there, Melody. Thank you for joining us. So to support what Jeff's saying, do you have anything you'd like to add? And thank you for the work you've done so far.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to add a couple of high-level concepts as we move forward, if there are any other questions. And just a bit of background on the plant itself. So because it was one of the first MBR facilities constructed in Ontario, there were a lot of design decisions that were made at the time that were considered state-of-the-art and best practice. But over time, it's become clear with the older style facilities that it actually impacts the ability to operate the plant under varying operating conditions, or to have that redundancy and ease of operation and maintenance, particularly of the membranes themselves. And so there are modifications that you can make to your facility moving forward that will require some capital expenditures that will give you that flexibility that is now put into MBR type facilities. But as the facility stands currently, because you have such a high loading coming from CSB, the treatment plant is essentially more like an industrial wastewater treatment plant that also treats domestic wastewater. And that adds another layer of complexity to the operation of the facility and maintaining the level of treatment that you need. In terms of defining, in a nutshell, the importance of narrowing down what CSB's plans are for the future. For every cubic meter of wastewater that you add from a domestic source, that would equate to about 3 or 4 people in terms of the loadings to the treatment system. So the amount of pollutants that you would need to remove. But for every cubic meter of wastewater from Creemore, it's the equivalent of 50 to 75 people. So you can see how quickly you would use up capacity at your treatment plant if you're treating more of the brewery wastewater. So that's why in the assumptions that we made in terms of the upgrades that you would need to do to be able to service the short-term growth of about 250 people, that assumes that there would be essentially no additional loadings from CSB in that short-term period. And so that just speaks again to what Jeff was talking about, that defining CSP's plans in the short term and then ultimately in the long term are very critical for planning for this facility.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Melanie, for that. And to be honest, Jeff, Mike, Melanie, when I reviewed this report, I reflected upon some of the horror stories that we've dealt with at this table in regards to sewage treatment operations in Creemore, particularly the times when we had sump pumping increasing our flow rates that were beyond what we had expected, and yet today our system in Creemore is now pretty tight. Jeff or Mike, would you be able to comment on that? Like just quickly before we go to questions, that we've actually done a good job keeping track of all of our excess water coming into the system. Is that right, Mike?
Spent a lot of time solving the infiltration issues. Melody may even be able to comment on that, but for 550 connections and average flows under 400 cubic meters, I would say comparatively we're probably a pretty tight system.
Yeah, we're doing a lot better than a lot of communities like this. So anyway, like I said, when I was reading it, that's one of the things that came to my mind was all the work that we've done in the past to try to limit any excess coming into it already. So all right, members of council, it's a pretty extensive report, a lot of technicalities. I recognize the deputy mayor, I recognize Councillor Patterson. Is there anybody else who would like to chip in on this lovely topic? Mr. Deputy Mayor, go ahead first.
Thank you. My question is for the director of, I gotta think your title, Mike, Director of Public Services. Public Works, that's it. So my understanding, and maybe you can answer this, and I understand that this was new technology when this facility was built, and it was expected to handle X amount of cubic meters of wastewater. And in fact, we found out that it's not performing to near the efficiency that we thought it was. So regardless of the volume that's going through it, what efficiency is it operating? Is it operating at like 50% of what we expected it to, 40%? Could you give me just an idea what percentage it's operating at as compared to what we had expected it to operate at?
Sure. So it should be capable of 860 cubic meters a day. That's called the phase 1 capacity. And currently, if it hits above 400, we have problems. So less than half. And the report describes some ways we can gain some of that back, new membranes and whatnot.
Follow up. So thank you for that answer. So what percentage do you think we can gain back through changing of the membranes or new technology involving the membranes? Can we gain 10%, 20% back?
Yeah, I'd want to defer to Jeff for that, just in case I said something that wasn't 100% accurate. It's complex. That's why they're here.
And certainly I would echo it is complex, and if Melody is comfortable answering, I would defer to her because she did get into the capacity of the membranes a bit in her report. And if she's okay to respond, I would let her.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep, that's fine. Yep. Sorry.
Go right ahead, please. Yep.
Okay. So there are two things to consider when you look at the capacity of sewage treatment plants. And the first is the hydraulic capacity, which is the original design value of 860 cubic meters a day. But also tied to that was an organic loading capacity. So the organic loading capacity for the plant under the original design was just over 270 kilograms per day of BOD. When I looked at what your plant is currently receiving now, it's actually around 410 kilograms per day of BOD coming in. So you're actually running that facility with an organic loading that's about 50% higher than the original design value. Despite the fact that you're running it at significantly lower flows than the original flow value. So there's always two aspects to consider. Generally speaking, for a municipal wastewater treatment plant, the assumptions that are made during the design in terms of loadings that individuals would contribute to a sewer system on any given day are quite conservative. So generally a municipal plant will reach the hydraulic capacity before they reach the organic loading capacity. Your situation is quite different. You've long since exceeded your original organic loading capacity, and you're nowhere near your hydraulic capacity. So I'll just start by prefacing it there. The peak flow reduction that you've seen through all of your II reduction work has helped you in terms of not needing to expand some of the equipment as much as you would have to if the peak flows were still elevated. So for instance, the membranes need to be designed to accommodate a reasonable peak hour flow or peak day flow, depending on the amount of equalization in the tank with them. So by reducing that, you also reduce the amount of membrane expansion that you need to do. Through operational changes at the facility to optimize the biological process control, and by replacing some of the membranes, you could get up to a hydraulic capacity of about 477 cubic meters a day, which would be the additional 250 people. But it's easier to just conceptualize it, I think, in terms of additional people that you could add to the plant. Moving forward, it makes it very difficult to determine what upgrades are required to get you back to the 860 cubic meters a day until you understand the longer term plans for Creemore Springs. If they have plans to discharge considerably more wastewater into the collection system as they increase their production, if they have plans to increase production, then you would need to upsize the biological treatment system a considerable amount. If they're not planning to increase their discharge much above what they're doing today, then you wouldn't have to expand it nearly as much. But again, that comes down to what their longer term plans are. For the membranes themselves, there are a couple of key factors that impact their capacity. The first, obviously, is what the peak flows are and when they occur and what the wastewater temperature is. They're very sensitive to low temperatures. That reduces their capacity substantially. And unfortunately, that's usually when you see peak flows, would be in April during a snow melt. So it's a bad combination for the membranes. But because you've reduced your II flows, you're in pretty good shape on that front. The next is how much biomass, how many microorganisms you need to hold in your bioreactors to be able to treat the loadings that come in. If your bioreactors are undersized, you have to run at a higher mixed liquor concentration, which makes the contents of the bioreactor thicker, and it becomes more difficult for the membranes to pull the water out of that solution. So by increasing the operating volume, expanding the bioreactors appropriately for the loadings that the plant is currently seeing, you can reduce that concentration and make it easier for the same membranes to permeate through.
Wow. It's a very detailed report.
Explanation, but I think I grasped, actually, I think I grasped, you made it reasonably easy to grasp what you were saying. So thank you for that. That's all, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. Thank you, Melanie, for that explanation. It's interesting, isn't it, that when we're on the leading edge, when this was built before most of us were on council, and now it's not even working to 50%. It's disappointing. Councillor Patterson, you had some questions that you wanted to ask, and any other members? I'm looking for any other cards. Okay, Councillor Patterson, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, and it is good to have this report at this level of detail in hand, so we can sort of look towards the future. And a lot of my questions are just that. If I understand the process as outlined in option 1, we could have that 250 additional persons number by 2021, in about a year from now. Is that what we're saying? If things
Mr. Ron?
So Councillor Patterson, again, it depends on what's going to happen with the brewery.
But assuming the brewery load is the CSB load is not changed, and it all goes to residential treatment. Is that what the 2021 number represents?
I'm gonna let Jeff answer, but I believe if the brewery doesn't change, the brewery is causing the loading is hard to control, but if the brewery doesn't change and we can work with them, I believe that was the answer was yes, Jeff.
So timeline wise, I would say yes, Mike and Councillor, but it's not, it is a prerequisite that CSB doesn't change, but there are a number of upgrades to be implemented over and above the operational changes. That's kind of why it's going to take a year. So we need to confirm those assumptions, and then it would take that long before they would go up. And those upgrades included, the capital works included some changes to pumping and flow metering. Also looking at replacing membrane cassettes, and also trying to find an alternate method for dealing with the sludge production. So if you can't get that in place within a year, you won't be in a position to add the houses, even if CSB doesn't increase. So there's a multi-pronged effort to get there, but if those are the works that are authorized and proceed, then we kind of thought they could be in place by that date, which we said was spring 2021, right, in the timeline there. So that was an item in the timeline. So hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, so just to follow on that line. So I understand what we're actually talking about in terms of growth. You use the expression, well, 250 additional persons. Are we talking, we measure per household though, I think. Are we talking about persons? And then I'd have to calculate at 2.8 people per household, come up with a number around 89 houses. What, could you just clarify that that number?
I think your math is relatively accurate there.
You put that to Mr. Ron. Mike, go ahead.
That's accurate. Now, keep in mind that's from current data, and there are a number of houses being built currently on Mary Street. So that would have to come off of that calculation.
So we're talking then, if I understand when we're talking about 89 new homes. If there was no additional loading from the Creemore Springs Brewery, and if we were being occupied by 2.8 persons per household.
That's a reasonable calculation, but as time moves forward, the effects of the remedies that we put in place will be measured. So I would say if we get through the spring, we would have a better idea how much we would be able to add. And Creemore Springs Brewery, I've shared this council report with them today with some correspondence. They certainly feel that they've invested a lot of money in the Creemore sewer plant. They may have a different position than Clearview, and that's fine. We everybody has opinions on how things work, so that'll have to be looked at, as well as what their plans are moving forward. Would also ask that when we amend the Creemore Springs overstrength agreement, that's going to come back to council for some considerations. There will be recommendations from myself and Mr. Langlois and Melody through Jeff that will have to be considered at some point. So there's a lot going on here. It's why I brought the report to council. Just one thing I should mention though, on the costing. We had the Burnside's feasibility study in hand late 2019. When we did the water and sewer rate report, the background study for the rate report, we included the feasibility study numbers. So 25% of these costs are built into the user rates, right? That's how we do things. We have no surprises. We try to build in. The expectation is that 75% of the costs are going to be borne by the benefiting users. So that would require an amendment to the DC background study and a possible contribution from the brewery if they so choose. Along with that, in the report, you will note that we did apply for funding and it was declined. That was disappointing, but not surprising. Seems to be a trend with the government funding applications, and anyway, just wanted to pass that on for the financial aspect. Thank you.
So if I may,
Yes,
so
go ahead.
the reason I wanted just to go into that calculation of number of units so that we in council can appreciate that there's a number of developments pending in Creemore. One of them is a 72 unit building, and of course there's the extension of the current project that's going on in Mary Street Alliance. So we're in effect, and I wasn't trying to nail you down, Mike, to the absolute number. I just wanted to get it to a range where we can talk in terms of number of new homes, which is easier to understand and public to understand as well. So we're effectively in a freeze now, as you stated the last time we met, with severances, any fill-ins, and in fact, until we know the results of this study, that again is good to have in hand and work on, there aren't, we can maybe proceed with the development applications, but they certainly won't get past draft approval until this is resolved. And even when this is resolved, it could be to 2026 before a final solution beyond the 90 homes. I'll just use that as an example. Or is there a hope that there'll be another interim solution after the 250, I'll use the term 250 increase in capacity is realized, if it is?
Again,
Mr. Ryan?
through your worship, the interim capacity is operational. It's the only units that are listed are all we foresee as having as interim capacity. I think, you know, one of the things we're going to encourage is having the development community come together, because as much as sewer is right now the stumbling block, you know, once you get to about 80 to 100 units, you know, there's also a water supply requirement. The developers seem to be wanting to talk to each other, at least some of them, about maybe helping with this issue. So as time progresses, you know, we're going to be looking at the things we can fix as we look at the larger solution, and we have the developers on board and the benefiting users. We can look to them to support what we want to do. It could be that there's enough interest with the way the economy is and the building boom in this area that we may want to look beyond the phase one capacity, and, you know, maybe instead of 860, maybe we're going to have to hit like 1200 or something. But those things are all going to have to be determined as time moves on.
Okay, and my last question,
Thank you very much.
my last question, if I may, is
Well, other people want to speak too, Tom, but you've been dominating so far. Why don't you keep going?
My last question is, do we expect an intake on the green stream, the one that we were rejected in the first go around?
Mr. Ron? Sorry, Councillor, through your worship, are you asking if we're reapplying for that?
Is there an intake to apply to?
Not that I'm aware of. The COVID thing is pretty well tied up. A lot of the money, there are some infrastructure programs being discussed, but I'm not aware of an intake at this time.
Thank you.
There's no intake that I've been made aware of, so that's a good point. Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Mr. Broderick is next. Mr. Broderick, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm just curious, long-term, should we be looking at a different type of waste treatment facility?
Well, that is the multi-million-dollar question. And from the evidence that Ms. Johnson and her firm have produced, we can probably see this operate out till 2026 anyway, if we can get some mediation in here and get some things repaired and work with our major industrial contributor, obviously. Mr. Ron, is there anything you'd like to add there about possibility of a completely new technology?
Yeah, I really would, Councillor Broderick, through your worship. For about 5 years, that's been my thought process. let's get rid of this and get something in there that works. You know, we've had people talk about the sequencing batch reactors. It's a different technology altogether, and it's supposed to be really great for BOD loading. And one of the surprises, you know, and Melody's report, she kind of pointed out that some of these new technologies may be great for certain things, but in addition to BOD loading, there's cleaning chemicals, and the quality of the sewage changes hour by hour. It's not just something that comes in over a whole day. It's not easy to maintain, and the membrane technology actually does a fantastic job of cleaning the water for putting it into the environment. I'm probably going to just stop there and let Jeff expand on that other treatment technologies answer.
Mr. Langlaw, anything to contribute there?
Thank you, Your Worship. So yeah, Mike's on track with his response there. Membranes do have a very absolute performance in terms of the water that goes through is clean. The challenge historically with them is sometimes you can't get all the water through them that you want to put through them, right? Which is a different thing. So even in the report that Melody's prepared, she has looked at a high level in terms of alternate approaches to wastewater treatment, whether things can be used in combination with the membranes, or actually, substituting a more conventional or older school filtration for membranes. That is a possibility, but based on my own experience, and Melody would probably second this, membranes are currently a very popular option for membrane solutions to get a high level of treatment quality. Even with the awareness of their challenges, because of their sort of high level absolute performance, the ministry likes them. So once they're in, they will be challenging to remove, we expect. The one thing that I don't think we've mentioned today is that, one possibility for the Creemore wastewater treatment plant improvements is essentially to look to Creemore Springs, or in some manner at the plant, pre-treat the Creemore Springs discharge, either at Creemore Springs or before it's combined with the wastewater to the plant, so that you're using a technology which is more specifically targeted to their challenging wastewater, and it's not in there messing up the regular domestic wastewater, so to speak. That is something that we will certainly explore with Creemore, because it dovetails into the whole overstrength agreement thing, because if they don't pre-treat, they need an overstrength agreement, which is where they are today. And that is something that if Creemore did undertake, Creemore Springs undertook to add pre-treatment, not knowing their funding, but in terms of the bureaucratic side of it, they could implement that solution much faster than we can implement a municipal upgrade, right? Because we have to do an environmental assessment and a long designed tender process and approval process. It's a whole different framework for the private treatment at Creemore. Not saying that they're keen to do that, but it is something that would accelerate the timeline, and also would essentially free up capacity more quickly, because taking away that strong wastewater would dramatically impact the forecast for the plant. So hopefully that answered your question.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else with any other questions for our team of experts who have been dealing with this amazing issue? Yes, Mr. Lamers, go ahead.
Yeah, with your upgrades over the next 7 years, with all the infrastructure and everything coming onto the books in Creemore, are you going to be able to sort of stay ahead of that?
Mr. Rowe?
Councillor Lamers, through your worship. So when subdivision gets draft plan, they need servicing has to be available before they can proceed to final, and we grant those approvals. So we need to get things working, as we've done in Stainer. In order to actually make that work, we've actually had the development community contribute up front, like the cost of our sewer plant, pump station, and piping to Wasaga Beach, for example. And I said before, Creemore also has, in the future, we need to expand the water supply in Creemore. There was one subdivision part of their conditions were to drill a well and put in a reservoir. They didn't even drill a test well that I'm aware of. So that process hasn't started. Be happy to take that on, but unless there's a serious push and some money behind it, you know, let's put it this way. Historically, Clearview Township hasn't front-ended multi-million dollars worth of infrastructure in hopes that development will start.
Mr. Lamers, if I may, I'd like to just add that the Township of Clearview has had some great success in bringing developers together to help us meet infrastructure challenges. You've heard it mentioned tonight, the sewage agreement with the town of Wasaga Beach and that sewer line. That was as a result of some pretty extensive negotiations and some development charge pre-sales to create the capital funding in order to fund this type of work. As Mr. Ron points out, it's not common for this township to invest upfront in anticipation of receiving the money from growth. So it's been the process so far. If you remember some of our talk about development charges, that the whole idea is that developers need to pay for that infrastructure that's underground. And that helps the entire community. Then the work that's above ground is where the developers compete with each other for the price of their product and the size of their buildings, et cetera. So we've had some pretty good luck in the township to do that. So I'm sure that we're, as Mr. Ron has indicated, there are some developments in and around the Creemore area that are showing some interest in creating that. So through our leadership here with our managers, we'll report back to council with how that negotiation goes. How's that? Anybody else with any other questions or comments? All right, the last thing I'd like to add is just a comment on Councillor Patterson's doing the math on the numbers. It will be a bit of a sliding target as to what our availability and capacity is at the plant. It's as mentioned by Mr. Langlois, the sewage types change during the day, and so the capacity of the plant changes, but we can create an average overall and work with the best engineering we can to develop the numbers of residential units that we can release. But it will be a bit of a moving target, so we don't want to lock down on the number of 89, Mr. Patterson, that you mentioned. We want to indicate that that will change based on the work and the studies as we see what changes can be made to the plant, and then this agreement with CSP as well. So just want to make sure that that's clear, that that's not a firm number, that's a sliding target. Anybody else with any other comments? Thank you very much, Ms. Johnson. I appreciate the work and the very extensive report. It's an interesting topic for sure. So thanks for your input on that. And Mr. Langlois, as always, your company has consistently given us good advice and giving us good engineering. So thank you for that. Members of council, the motion has been moved and seconded. Is there anything further? Seeing none, I'm prepared to call the motion. All those in favor? The motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Ron, for leading this, and I'm sure you're going to report back to us on as this project moves forward. Thank you, Ms. Johnson and Mr. Langlois. All right, council, we have Parks, Recreation, and Culture. PCR 017-2020, the Creemore Village Green Project regarding spray pad, splash pad. Mr. Vachon is with us. That's great. Nice to see you there, Terry. All right, so I will read this and then I'll ask for a mover and seconder. And it does go over to page 4, so I don't want to forget that. Okay, member council, here we go. Recommendation be it resolved that council of the Township of Clearview hereby one receive PCR 017-2020, the Creemore Village Green Splash Pad Spray Pad report for information. And item 2, approve the Creemore Village Green Spray Pad Splash Pad component of the project and authorize staff to work with the Creemore Community Foundation to manage any outstanding requirements before final construction is approved by the township. And item 3, further that the management agreement be amended such that the Creemore Community Foundation cover the additional costs of hydro due to the spray pad splash pad component. Okay. Yes, Councillor Patterson, I presume you'd like to move that. Is that what that card is? Mover, Councillor Patterson, seconded by a member of council? That'd be Mr. McKechnie, Councilor McKechnie. Okay, so the splash pad, spray pad component. Mr. Vachon, would you like to outline, first of all, your report and outline some of the work that's gone into bringing this forward to council at this time?
Yes, for sure. Thanks, Your Worship. Yeah, so to refresh council's memory, we presented a report to council on June the 22nd, approving the Creemore Village Green project. But at that time, we excluded the splash pad component of the project. Back then, we received not enough details with respect to the splash pad to recommend it to be approved by council. Since then, my team with my department, senior management, the Public Works Department with the Water and Sewer Department, as well as our engineers with RJ Burnside, have been working with the Creemore Community Foundation to go through all the increment details of their splash pad, and of course dot all the I's and cross all the T's to make sure that it meets both our requirements as well as the water and sewer requirements, as well as health requirements. So you have today our report to present to council that we're recommending that council approve that component, which would be the pretty much the final component of that project. And also part B to that is to amend the existing 20-year management agreement that we have with the Creemore Community Foundation with respect to the extra hydro costs that would be achieved by the splash pad. So they're anticipating that the splash pad will operate approximately 4 months a year. So there will be an additional cost to run the pumps, to run the splash pad components, and so they've agreed to cover that extra cost. So at this time, Your Worship, I'm willing to answer any questions, and like I said, we're recommending this to be approved by council.
All right, thank you, Mr. Vachon, and I believe Mr. Sage is with us as well, so we may draw upon him because he was certainly involved in some of the negotiations of this. So I recognize Deputy Mayor Burton. Anybody else who would like to throw their card up right now? Okay, Walker and then Broderick. Go ahead, Barry, you're up first.
Thank you, Your Worship. You've been kind to me tonight. You've been picking me first all along. My question is for Mr. Vachon. So item number 3 says here that further management agreement be amended so that Creemore Community Foundation cover the additional cost of hydro. But maybe you can explain, there will be water and sewer expenses involved in this, and are they covering that as well? Maybe you could confirm that for me, that there will be sewer and water expenses and that they will be covering them.
Mr. Vachon?
Yeah, so to my knowledge, thank you, Your Worship, through you to Deputy Mayor Burton. To my knowledge, in our agreement, the township was to cover the water and sewer component of the project. That's what was originally intended. So that hasn't been discussed any further. I don't know if CAO Stage has any more to offer, but to my knowledge, the water and sewer was still to be covered by the township.
All right, Deputy Mayor, is any other questions there on that topic?
No, that answers the question, but I don't think I can support this if they're not covering the sewer and water. I think that, I mean, this is the whole idea of this foundation, was to cover all the operational costs of this facility from the get-go, and then they're not going to cover the water and sewer involved, especially with what we're just dealing with now.
Right. Okay, thank you. Mr. Sage, have your hand up. Go ahead, Mr. Sage.
Yeah, Your Worship. As indicated previously in the previous agreement that council already approved, it is a Parks and Rec facility. The sewer and water usage might be quite a bit for a few months in the middle of winter, but let's be honest, there'll be 6 or 7 or 8 months where there'll be limited use. But council has already agreed to the previous year agreement, Your Worship. So absolutely, if you don't want to support this motion, that's fine. But as far as the preceding agreement, it's already been agreed to by council.
Okay, that's helpful. Okay, we're gonna go to Walker next, then Broderick, then Deneen. Okay, Mr. Walker, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. To Terry, I've had a chat with Councillor Patterson this morning. Definition of a splash pad. Now, I foresee a splash pad as a unit with multi activity centers. My understanding from the drawings that I've seen is this is not really a splash pad in the sense of my definition, but it's a single, there's multiple jets, but there's one activity center only. Is that correct? And that's just a straight line where the jets come out of the water, comes up out of the ground. So we're just looking at a one activity center versus 10, 12, 14, like some of them have.
Okay, Mr. Johnson, just a good understanding of what a splash pad is.
Through Your Worship, yeah, Councillor Walker is 100% correct. That is exactly what it is. It's just one activity. It's not like a multiple of activities. It's just one activity with, I think they had about 8 jets coming out of the ground.
I think it might be 9 jets in total, actually, what I recall. But anyway, yes, you're right. Mr. Walker, anything else?
Yes, just further, our watering system is a recovery retreat system or a strictly, I believe it is, from what I saw, it looked like a recovery retreat system.
Yep, that is correct, and it's treated with chlorine.
Okay.
Chlorine.
Yeah, chlorine, and it's acid base. It's just like a pool. It gets treated same as a pool.
Okay. Great, thank you, Mr. Walker. We'll probably have another round here. Mr. Broderick is next, and then Ms. Deneen. Anybody else? Okay, Mr. Broderick, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. To Mr. Vachon, this actually came up at last week's Accessibility Advisory Committee meeting. There were some concerns about wet surfaces and folks with mobility issues. I was wondering if you could speak to that.
Mr. Vachon?
Yeah, through Your Worship, to Councillor Broderick, I'm not aware of any issues. The splash pad is stamped by a professional engineer. You know, it's fully approved. It's like any other splash pad that you see in other communities. I'm not aware of any slipping issues or accessibility issues with the drawings that's been provided to us. It's been reviewed by our engineers, and we all feel comfortable that it's meeting the standards that are put forth by these engineers.
Thank you.
Mr. Broderick?
Just one more thing. In terms of staffing, how will that be addressed?
That's a good question. Mr. Vachon, staffing regarding this.
Sure, thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, so the management agreement that's been approved by Council with the Creemore Community Foundation, they will be staffing the park at all times. They will have their own maintenance staff. They will have their own program coordinator. And so this is, we will not be using township staff to maintain or monitor the park. That is their responsibility as per the management agreement that's been executed.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Deneen is next. Anybody else would like to throw in there? Okay. Go ahead, Phyllis.
Your Worship, to Terry. So staff there won't be any additional duties to staff regarding the cleaning, winterization, pressure testing, reopening. You won't be doing that like the pool. They'll be looking after all those costs, any blockages, that sort of thing.
That is 100% correct, Councilor Deneen.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's in a 20-year management agreement that we have with them to offset all those costs for the entire park, not just a splash pad, but for the entire park.
So the hydro was just something that was missed in the original agreement. Okay. Thank you.
I'm looking for other cards. I see the deputy mayor. Go ahead, deputy mayor.
Yes, so when I go back to the, the original plan and we approved everything but the splash pad. So at that stage, I was under the impression that the fountain, as has been in the past, is a self-contained unit and use very little water and very little sewer usage. So that there is very little sewer water usage to be paid for. But now that they're adding the splash pad, I mean, do we have any idea of how much water and sewer we're going to be using? And any idea on what that volume is going to be? And what the cost to the public or to the tax dollar to the taxpayer that's going to be?
Mayor, I see Mr. Ron has joined us. I'll go to Mr. Vachon first, and perhaps he'll, and Mr. Sage was there. He's just disappeared again. Mr. Vachon, go ahead.
Your Worship, I was going to ask Mr. Ron to join us to answer that question. He can answer that better than I can.
Okay, between Steve and Mike, go ahead, Mike.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, through your worship. Trust me, with what's going on with our sewers, I looked into this thoroughly. Recirculating, it's a good thing. It uses the equivalent of one house. So our problems in the Creemore sewer system are typically in the spring. In the summer, not a real big issue. Unfortunately, development can't just run in the summer, but one house worth of sewage over 4 months in the summer of the year is not going to adversely affect us. And then the billing would be the equivalent of whatever your water and sewer bill is for 4 months, plus a fee to turn the water off and on.
Mr. Sage?
Yeah, if I could. And I think the whole point of what Mike said that maybe we're not understanding is this unit, for lack of argument, is self-contained. So there are many spray pads. So just to back up a few years, this is the third or fourth time we've brought the spray pad issue to Clearview Council. And in the past, the capital cost and the ongoing water and sewer cost attributed with the operation was not palatable to council. But in this situation, the capital cost is coming from others, and the design of the system that they're installing recirculates their water, retreats it, so therefore they're not using new water all the time and dumping it into the sewer. So the technology is very low use. There are other similar systems throughout the province, but I can tell you, if you go to the one in Ellenvale, it's a lot larger than this one, but the technology is the same. So the water and sewer use is very marginal. Thank you.
Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. Is there anybody else with any questions or comments? Okay, yes, Mr. Patterson, go ahead.
Okay, if I may just address some of those concerns. The deputy mayor asks a question about the operation and the management side. You'll remember back in October 7th, 2019, when we passed the last, when we approved the project as it was without the spray pad and with the construction agreement and the management agreement. One of the covenants that was undertaken as part of the agreement by the township was to pay any and all taxes and any and all operational expenses. And that normally that would apply to the whole Village Green concept. However, in recognition of the fact that the spray pad wasn't approved then, that it would, and I guess discussions went on with Steve and Terry and the Village Green people. They undertook the responsibility of taking up the expense of the additional electricity that would run the splash pad. In effect, the fountain and the spray pad are really serviced by the same equipment, essentially, except for the equipment that might be used for the spray jets. And so what you've heard is essentially what the Village Green has done is they've taken the fountain and completely upgraded all the water and hydro, and also the pump house, so that it all works off one self-contained system. Okay, so I think it was just a recognition by Village Green that if council saw that as an addition to our last agreement approval, then they would take on the expense of the additional electricity for the splash pad. There is, and I appreciate General Manager Ron's comment about his due diligence, and I would add the comment from the Village Green that Terry Vachon also, I think, submitted 70 odd questions to get to this point. And so I appreciate the due diligence being done by both our staffs on this. The Village Green is hiring a contractor that knows about pools to manage the spray pad, as they are taking on contractors to do the maintenance that it falls to them as part of the agreement through the whole Village Green. So I just want to make that clear. In terms of accessibility, again, the concerns, the commitment has always been from the Village Green proposal to meet the standards and exceed them in terms of AODA standards. There's been many conversations with accessibility. This is a barrier-free splash pad. There's no curbing. There's nothing to restrict anyone in a wheelchair or a walking device should they choose to benefit. The splash pad is all residents in the township would, they can do so. The jets are at grade or subgrade, and the only thing you would see that distinguishes it as a splash pad is the one bollard where the activation button is to run 15-minute cycles, and the water when it comes up out of the surface of the splash pad. So, and the splash pad is only about 15 foot by 18 foot. So we're not talking about anything close to Elmvale or Victoria Park in Aurelia or Tudholme Park. This is a spray pad. I understand from, and maybe Terry could provide this bit of advice. Normally we would refer to this as a spray pad, but apparently there are regulatory issues that require that it's be called a splash pad. Terry, could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, good question, actually, Mr. Patterson. I was wondering the same. Mr. Vachon?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship, and for you to Councillor Patterson. Yeah, this splash pad and spray pads are pretty much one of the same. Most people know them as splash pads. You know, if you really look into the increment details of the two, they're pretty much the same. It's just the way the water is kind of splashed. You know, if water comes from a bucket that's overflowing and water splashing all over the place, that's technically the splash pad. And then the little water jets is the spray component, so it's referred to as a spray pad. The spray pad and the splash pad are the same. They're both managed by recirculating water or their pumps, and it's not like a fountain, as an example. A fountain has a little pump and it's just, you know, very, very soft with the water. But spray pads and splash pads are one and the same. Most people know it as splash pads.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Patterson. Mr. Vachon, anything else then? All right, I've got a couple of questions, if I may. Oh, actually, Mr. Broderick, I'll defer to you first. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just speaking of accessibility, where did we land on accessibility parking for both the Village Green and the station on the green?
Yeah, actually, that's not part of this report, but it's of interest for sure.
I know, but it is, and it isn't. It isn't part of the report, but it certainly will have an impact.
Mr. Sage, do you have any comment on where that landed? I don't think it's landed, has it?
Your Worship, I can't answer that question. Maybe Terry can. Yeah, I think Terry can. I'm sorry, I can't.
Yeah, that's news to me too. Mr. Basham.
Sure, thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, so the existing Station on the Green parking lot had 2 accessibility parking, if you recall, next to the door. We've moved those 2 parking to the north end of the parking lot. If you go back on the June 22nd report, there's a clear map of where that is. So we just basically moved those 2 parking spots a little north on the north end of the parking lot. And there's also, we're also contemplating perhaps adding another parking on the street there in front of the Station on the Green as well.
On Caroline Street, right?
Caroline Street, correct.
Talked about that, yes.
So,
I don't think that's been affirmed yet, because that would be a decision of council on Caroline Street. Yeah. But certainly this project, we moving it from one spot to another is acceptable. Yeah. Good.
Thank you.
Is that good, Mr. Broderick?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right. I've got a couple of questions, if I can, to both Mr. Vachon and Mr. Sage. First of all, I just want to clarify, I did mention that it was 9, and it's interesting because the drawings show 11, but there's one of the schematics that show only 9. So I'm unsure as to how many jets are actually proposed. The drawing shows 11, but the plumbing schematic only showed 9 jets. So irregardless, I'm sure it's a good design. Somebody's thought about this, so you can send me an email to tell me, could firm it up as to what it is. But I'm going to go with 11 because that's the most prominent number that I'm seeing throughout the drawings, but the schematics only showed 9. Anyway, the other thing, Mr. Patterson, I think, answered this question that I had, was about activation. The activation bollard would then activate it for in that neighborhood of a 15-minute time period. And it then would have a rest period that could then be reactivated after so many minutes of not running. So it's not a situation where a kid could just sit there and keep punching it and it would just keep coming, right? It would have to have a rest period of some type. Is that right?
To me, Your Worship?
Yes.
Yeah. It would be fairly quickly, mind you. Like probably within 30 seconds type of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, there is a bit of a reset there to recalibrate the pumps.
Yeah, that's what I understand. I've seen them in other places where, it's funny because I remember this as a splash pad in Ontario place years ago, that's how old I am anyway. So the other point I want to make was that working with the Village Green, certainly with the representative of the foundation, Mr. Lazar, I've had conversations with him just recently, and I apologize to him that he did call me and I didn't get a chance to call him back until later on today, but we did connect. I think the foundation has represented themselves pretty well when it comes to this project. What has disappointed me with this whole business of the spray pad, splash pad, was that it was a component that wasn't thoroughly vetted. Certainly, the various meetings that we attended, I didn't have any recollection of this being discussed. The initial presentation that was made, I believe Sarah Hershoff made the first presentation to council that was fully informing us of what the intention was of this project. It wasn't in that presentation. And so this did pop up as part of the approvals, as was mentioned in Terry's report about June 22nd. The design plans were presented to our staff. Our staff sent it in, and the appearance of a splash pads, spray pad was that's when it first surfaced. And so it's been an interesting process to get to this point. I took it on in my own interest to have a conversation with Mr. Ron about the engineering about this. And I'm glad someone else asked that question about the plumbing and the water. I feel much better about the project after talking to Mr. Ron, knowing that we can in fact handle the increased water that would be produced by this, both our sewage system and our water system. I would ask through Terry that we would be able to monitor that water, that there will be a meter, I guess, on this, and through Mr. Ron's department, we would be able to monitor exactly how much water is being used so that we would be able to judge whether it's been successful after a couple of seasons, and whether it's exceeding our expectations as far as the volume of water. The other aspect too is the water that will be used on that site will be used, of course, for the plants, which is what our horticultural society is all about, watering those plants and looking after the flower beds. So, you know, water usage will be a concern to me. So anyway, I'm surprised that it took this this project to it popped up at the last minute. But having discussed it with our staff, I do feel that we can go ahead with this. It's a very small pad, very small splash pad. I'm surprised that that it did show up when it did, but nevertheless, it's there. And as pointed out by Mr. Sage, the capital investment on this is not coming from the taxpayers. Down the road, after 20 years is up, we'll have a better understanding about how it works. And that's when the municipality will be taking full operation of it after some 20-year period. So if I can, just a question to Mr. Sage on that. Is there any changes to the agreement after this point that you perceive us seeing? Will we be taking ownership of this project, full ownership of it, sooner than 20 years? Or is this, it seems to me the agreement was pretty clear on 20 years, right, Mr. Sage? Sorry, I think your microphone's muted there, sir.
I am. Sorry about that, Your Worship. Yes, you're 100% right, Your Worship. The agreement is for 20 years. There's no reason for us to think otherwise. The foundation has a duty to report their financials to the municipality on a regular basis. And we are tracking that already. And I can assure you at this point in time that their financial commitments to the project have gone above and beyond what their expectations were. So we're pretty confident that they'll be able to meet their requirements. And if you don't mind, we're speaking quite a bit about amending the project. It was one of the things that I was pushing for on the hydro use, because before the village green was there, we did have hydro needs before. We had lighting, we had pumps, we had water, we had grass, we had all kinds of operations that were paid for through the station previously. But the difference in cost for hydro is about $1,200. So staff is getting right down to the details and making sure the taxpayer is not paying more than we should. Thank you.
That's very good. And if I may add, the other part of that too is the activation of the park with the stage facility. There may be additional electrical uses as a result of that stage too that will now be properly metered and properly paid for through the foundation. So I'm glad to see that that's done. Okay, I've seen you flash there a couple of times there, Councillor Patterson, with the yellow request to speak card. Everybody's had a chance to speak. What would you like to add at this time?
I'd like to just maybe explain a little bit. I didn't want this project to have a taint on it. The idea of a splash pad was talked during the community consultations, but it was considered by the Village Green as something that they would consider in the design, and they were concentrated on the major parts of the plan, the staging and the flower gardens and that sort of thing. And when it came, and then they were faced with the removal of the, not the removal, but the rearrangement of the fountain. And that was a significant increase that was accepted by the Village Green. Basically, they covered all the capital costs to move, to renovate, to put in all new water facilities, a new pumping house, all the new electricals that are associated with that. And when it got to that stage, and that got us to about just around April of the time, and then of course they came to council for approval. They hadn't quite considered whether or not they would include the spray pad. They were hoping to. And when it came down to doing the total design, having done all the work with the fountain and with the pump house and with the hydro and the water, this became a fairly straightforward addition. That's why you saw it come in now, and that's the explanation there. I also would like to just have a brief explanation from the CAO Sage on the agreement. My understanding of the agreement is that at the completion of the construction, the property that was TD Bank will be turned over to the municipality. And then the total package would then be leased by the Village Green.
Yes, so through your worship to Councillor Patterson. Councillor Patterson, you are correct. So the 20-year agreement is the operation. Once there's technically two agreements to your point. There's a construction agreement that takes us to a point where it's turned over, and then there's the operational agreement of 200. But you are 100% correct, Councillor Patterson.
And then to the mayor's concern about the reviewing, so is the Village Green. They want to make sure that they're meeting the township standards. So they have willingly offered to report back since they are leasing the land from the township. And there's the 20-year agreement will be renewed in 5-year increments. And so there will be an annual report. We can address things like the water, and then a 5-year renewal of the agreement. Every intention on the Village Green to have it for at least a 20-year period. And so any other concerns that might come up, there's some allowance there in terms of a management agreement. Just wanted to make sure that everybody on council understood that as well.
Yeah, for sure. Councillor Patterson, thank you for that review. The management agreement was reviewed by this council, and I reviewed it a couple of times, and if you recall, brought up points about some of the artwork, public art that's in that space, and so we made some amendments there, and we did in fact agree to it. And part of that is that there would be a meeting between the foundation and the municipality at least once a year, and further that the taxes that were payable on the TD building was included as far as the contribution towards the BIA. Was a locked-in figure. I don't have it right in front of me, but there was a locked-in number that would be forwarded to the Treasury to continue to support the BIA, et cetera. That's all in that agreement, and it's available here if anybody wanted to review it. But this amendment and this change to it is just to help operate the splash pad, spray pad. Very good. Anybody else with any other questions or comments about how we're moving this thing forward? Yes, Mr. Vachon, please.
Your Worship, just to confirm, yes, 11 vertical jet sprays.
Yeah, thank you for checking that out. Listen, on a smaller note about the jets, just quickly, and to address Councillor Broderick's accessibility, the jets are effectively going to be at the same ground level as the concrete or stonework. So they're not going to be protruding above, so that there are no trip hazards or stubbing of toes. They're also not going to be concave, so there won't be anything stuck in them. They're going to be right at the concrete level. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, that's the good designs for that. Okay, very good. Well, it'll be interesting to see how this one turns out. Okay, folks, we've had a really good discussion about this. We do have a mover and seconder on the floor on this one. Are there members of council that anything further? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Vachon. Members of council, I'm prepared to vote on the motion. All those in favor? And that motion carries. Thank you very much, council. Thank you, Mr. Vachon. I look forward to seeing how that works out. Okay, we have our treasurer. Kelly's here. Hello, Kelly McDonald. Sorry to keep you waiting. It isn't getting that late yet. McKechnie, I know it's your birthday, but we're not going to be extending the meeting today, okay? Council, there'd be no motion to extend. We did on Councillor Deneen's birthday, just so everybody knows. Okay. All right. Ms. McDonald is with us here for an outline of our plans for our budget presentation. And so I will read the motion and then I'll ask for a mover and secondary, and Kelly can update us. Our recommendation be it resolved that Council of Township Clearview hereby one, approve the 2021-2025 budget presentation schedule as presented. Mover and seconder on the floor, please. Deputy Mayor and Councillor Deneen. Deputy Mayor, Councillor Deneen. Hello there, Ms. McDonald. Nice to have you with us here today. Tell us about your calendar you presented to us.
Thank you, Your Worship. Happy birthday, Councillor McKechnie. I apologize. I didn't mean to put this on here, but we'll be quick. At our budget workshop, Council had expressed an interest in not attaching our budget meetings as we normally would to a regular council meeting. Just as you say, it's now 8:45. I don't think you're ready for another 4-hour budget discussion at this point in time. So what I've done is I've presented you with a schedule that offsets council meetings. Unfortunately, your December is going to be a little ugly, but you get to see us, so that'll be fun. They're scheduled 12 till 4. With them being Zoom meetings, I think that works for the public as well, because they can either view them during the meeting or they can view them after the meeting. So this is my proposed schedule.
Thank you very much for that. What we had discussed at the budget meeting, and for the benefit of Councillor Patterson, that, you know, again, holding these meetings in this format, in the Zoom format, we can perhaps hold them during the day on an opposite day of our council meetings. As our council meetings themselves have been becoming quite lengthy, let's say that we're now going to just meet more often. Does that make sense, everybody? Thank you. No, there's no concern. Any questions or comments to Ms. McDonald about our intention to have these meetings? Yes, Mr. Lamers. I knew you'd be jumping in on this, actually, Mr. Lamers. So, John Lamers, go ahead.
Yeah. Was there not 4 budget meetings scheduled and we're down to 2 now and then the public meeting?
In the prior years, it's sort of varied. What I've set up is, so meetings number 1 and 2 will be staff presentations of the staff proposed budget. Meeting number 3 is the meeting for the public, and that's where council takes input from the public on their concerns or their additional wishes. The final meeting that's not on this schedule right now will be in 2021, and that will be the council proposed budget. So that's where you'll deliberate what you want to add or take away from the meetings.
Any questions on that, Mr. Lamers? You're comfortable with that? Oh, he disappeared. Where'd he go? Anyway, there he is. Mr. Lamers, anything further?
No, that's fine. I was just comparing my notes to the calendar and it's like they didn't coincide, but they do. Okay, that's good.
Okay. All right. Now, I absolutely respect, obviously, Mr. Lamers, that your work schedule and also that of Councillor Broderick and many times the Deputy Mayor, who has different work responsibilities. We're comfortable with this proposal at this time, Councillor Lamers. I mean, you're going to be able to work it out, Mr. Broderick. You know, it's a difficult one. I appreciate it. I really do. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you, Ms. McDonald. I look forward to that, and look forward to seeing what the staff present here. And we'll have a good discussion. All right, members of council, you've heard the motion, and I've got a mover and seconder on the floor. Anything further? Seeing no hands, I'll call the motion. All those in favor? And that motion carries. Thank you very much. All right, council, unless there's anything further, I've got item 14, bylaw to confirm, and then motion to adjourn. Okay. Not see anything further. Item 14 is our bylaw to confirm the proceedings. Recommendation be it resolved. Bylaw number 20-63. Being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the October 5th, 2020 council meeting, be presented and read a first, second, and third time, and finally passed on the 5th of October, 2020. Can I have a mover and seconder? Councillor McKechnie, I see, and Deputy Mayor. Deputy Mayor, I see the Deputy Mayor. Thank you. You've heard the bylaw to confirm. All those in favor? Thank you. And a motion to adjourn. Before I do that, again, on behalf of council and the township, happy birthday, Councillor McKechnie. Hope you have a good one. Say hello to Jan and all the family. I'd also want to take this opportunity to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving. I know it's going to be different this year when it comes to COVID, so please keep your bubbles small and enjoy lots of leftovers, because the turkey will have lots of leftovers because it won't have a family full of people in your house to consume it. Well, good luck. Please stay safe out there. Motion to adjourn. Recommendation be it resolved that the council meeting be adjourned at 8:50 p.m. Is there a mover? Councillor Deneen, seconded. Councillor Walker, thank you very much. Anything further? All those in favor? And the motion to adjourn carries. So I will adjourn this council meeting and thank you all for joining us. Please enjoy the weekend. And as we close the meeting, I just want to acknowledge Mr. Sage once again. Thank you very much for your announcement. And we look forward to the next couple of months of working together as we formulate a plan on hiring a new CAO. Congratulations, Mr. Sage. Good luck. Thank you, everybody.